right. Hey now.
What's going
Hey
on,
now.
guys?
Happy Wednesday.
Absolutely. It's good to
We
see you guys, man.
Yeah, good to see you, John Charles. We are live. It is February the 23rd, 2022 on a Wednesday. Halenville Live. Welcome. We got a listening party going on tonight. We're going to listen to Diver Down with you and with our special guest that we are going to bring in very shortly. But we are doing a interactive listening party with you guys tonight. We're going to be listening to Diver Down in its entirety.
Absolutely.
All 31 minutes and some odd seconds of it. It's about as long as Fair Warning was a couple of weeks when we went diving down on that. But we're going diving down on Diver Down tonight. Yeah, so we'll probably start at 30, 45 minutes, and we're going to ask that you guys queue up Van Halen Diver Down on the easiest access of your music that you can access Diver Down, and cue it up and pause it and keep it handy. If you're at home on the turntable in the car on the CD player, but yeah. So find your Diver Down and get it ready, and we're all going to listen to it, and we're going to listen to it with our very special guest, John.
Yeah, guys, tonight, as you know, you probably know, we have author of Van Halen Rising and the authorized biography of Grammy-winning super producer Ted Templeman, long-suffering New York Jets fan, PhD historian and PhD historian of Van Halen, Dr. Greg Renoff.
Absolutely. Oh, dude.
Right there, on.
I'm just studying up. Nice to meet you. To be here with you guys.
Awesome. How awesome, man.
Dr.
Greg,
Renoff.
Pleasure to meet you. Absolute pleasure.
How are you guys?
Good.
Doing
How you
well.
doing, Greg?
Doing very well, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
welcome,
Thanks for
Greg.
being
Nice to have you, man.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So Greg, what have you been up to? You're writing anything good?
Yeah, I'm trying to get started on a new writing project. I've got a couple things. Had a little bit of a slowdown here with the COVID lifestyle, which put a cramp in my style a little bit in terms of being able to get some writing done that I wanted to. But been gratified with the response to the Templeman book, which came out just a little while ago, and we'll get something else up and running soon.
Yeah, we were talking before you came on here before, and saying, for Van Halen fans, there's maybe 4 must-read books and that you have to have if you're a Van Halen fan, and the top of the list is Van Halen Rising, and the Ted Templeman book is one of the other ones that are the top 3 or 4 must-read books. These are the top 2, and I mean, they're just you're a fan, so it's not just like some guy writing a book. So it's it's coming from a different place.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's like the blessing and the curse of it, right? Because you care a lot, right? I mean, like it'd be, I don't know, you pick a band I don't feel that passionate about. It might have been easier to write the book. You'd be like, it's good enough. You move on to the next part. But I was I'm invested, and it was a pleasure to write those books, and especially with work with Ted. That was an absolutely pinch me type of moment when I was doing that, and that was a real honor. And I'm so glad that was able to be brought to the finish line, and it was great. So thank you, very kind words, appreciate it.
Yeah, So a blessing and a curse. Let's say you wanted to write a book about something else. Now, are you always going to be the Van Halen guy? Like, you know, the guys that have played Batman and are always like, oh, he's Batman. You know, he can only be Batman.
Yeah, right. Like a guy who plays Madden football only wants to be like, well, I'm only the Jets, right? I'll only be the Jets. That won't be another team. I'll just, you know, however bad the team is on Madden, I always want to be the Jets. I had in another life, I was a college professor, and I wrote a prior book. I mean, I think, you know, the Ted Templeman book was interesting because it wasn't really like, you know, when I finished the Van Halen Rising book, or even when I was like getting near the end, it wasn't like I said, my next target is Ted Templeman. It was just, I ended up doing that book signing with Ted, that he was kind enough when I did the signing for Van Halen Rising in 2015, and he came out for it, and he sat and answered questions. And I think he was really kind of surprised at how enthusiastic people were about talking to him. You know, he's basically retired from the industry. And I think, you know, you sort of lose touch with, you know, you're not talking to everyday people about the records. He's not going on like Van Halen chat rooms or anything and ask, you know, it wasn't his thing. And, you know, that was all sort of work he had done in the past. And of course he loved the material he did and stuff. But I think that after he saw that, and after I kind of posed the idea to him, but it kind of like just came to me. Like, it wasn't like it wasn't like, you know, had him in my sights. It was more like, what about doing a book on you? And he was like, why would anyone want to read a book about me? And I swear that's what he said. Like, why would anyone want to read a book about me? And I was like, well, let's see, you know, let's talk. And, you know, I kind of nudged him into wanting to do it. He was sort of, you know, I was like, well, yeah, you know, I think when I tried to explain to him that I thought the way I would want to write this book would be to cover all stages of his life, his professional life, and to really spotlight the musicians that he worked with, the artists he worked with. And, you know, I think when he started to see that I really saw that as the way I wanted to convey his story that he was going to tell me, was basically to like say, like, you know, for Ted to be able to say, like, it was amazing to work with Michael McDonald, with Eddie Van Halen, with David Lee Roth, with Carly Simon, with, you know, go down the list of all these incredible, Bette Midler, all these people he got to be in studios with. I mean, that's where he sort of was like, oh yeah, okay, that's good, because he feels such pride about that. You know, not that like I'm so great I got to work with these people, but just more that he feels like that was the greatest part of his job, was to be able to work with such incredible talent and to basically make music with them and help them put on their best musical performances, you know, to the public, basically. So that was the way that all kind of came about. So yeah, it wasn't like when I finished the Van Halen Rising book that I thought I'm going to write another Van Halen related book. It was just more that this sort of presented itself. I had been started talking to Ted more, and he was just, you know, kind of buzzing from the book signing thing. And I, you know, I was kind of like, wow, you have a lot of. He started telling me about some of this other stuff that happened in his life. For example, if you've read the book, you know that he was on an airplane that was hijacked, and he was you know, lucky to be able to get off that plane where he did, rather than having to fly all the way to Italy with this crazy guy who hijacked his plane. And, you know, he was a pop star in the 60s himself, which I thought was another really interesting angle. I mean, there are other producers who had been stars to one extent. The other, you know, Quincy Jones, for example, was someone who was a music performer before he became a producer, but it's not the norm. And I thought that was another interesting angle on it, that Ted had the perspective to say what it was like to be on television, to be, you know, perform with Bob Hope, with Louis Armstrong, and these other people that he got to, you know, to share a stage with, just for that short period of time where he was in a band that had hits. And so that's why, you know, I kind of felt compelled to do it. Even more, you know, obviously the Van Halen thing was a major driver for me, but you know, I tried to really, when I did the book, try to give what I thought was fair time to the important albums. In other words, like, you know, we're here to talk about Van Halen, but you know, Ted did a lot of really, really amazing work with the Doobie Brothers, and I think that the Doobie Brothers offers a really good contrast to Van Halen and how that sort of went, you know, because Ted had a really good run with them, and then had a really good run with Van Halen. That's basically from like 1972, you know, to 1984, 85, 86, with one thing or another with Van Halen, whether it's the Hagar solo record, the Roth solo stuff. You know, Ted was making platinum records with those two groups particularly. So I thought that was a really, you know, interesting kind of bookend with that, where that was his sort of for lack of a better term, the peak of Ted's career was at 1972 to 1986 or 87 or so. That whole era of like Doobies and Van Halen together was kind of like the biggest of those hits for him. He had a lot of stuff that went on that era too, but those are the biggest.
Yeah, you covered everyone pretty fairly in that book. It wasn't just a Van Halen book.
No,
anybody could read.
Yeah,
the book.
right.
Anybody, a music fan, could read the book, and it wasn't just a Van Halen.
Yeah,
That's what was good about it. You know?
it's
yeah.
and that's actually one of the more gratifying comments I'll sometimes get from people who admit like, oh, I was just going to read the Van Halen chapters, then I started reading one of the other, and I was like, oh, I sucked into the Doobie Brothers thing. It's just it's an interesting series of years to think about too, because those are really like the peak record industry years. And something, again, the 90s were probably the CDs and stuff. The 90s may have been like bigger in terms of sales, actually, in terms of like, that was like crazy. The CD era was the amount of money was coming in from CDs. The industry might have been making more money in the 90s. 1698 CDs, as we all know, that didn't last forever. That blew up on them. But Ted was really from the 60s, kind of that beginning of that to that real pinnacle of when the record companies had the most power and stuff like that. Thought that was another interesting piece of it too, that he got to be an executive vice president at Warner Brothers, arguably the best and the biggest of those labels during that era too. So that was the other thing that was really I thought made it for a story that should be told, is that Ted got to be that, wear those two hats, right? Which was I'm a vice president, I'm also the producer.
Yeah, it was definitely the golden years of the record.
Definitely.
He was in the middle of that, because look at it now. It's a shadow of what it's.
Yeah, these two are must reads. They are absolutely.
Yeah, it's a completely different animal now. Yeah. It's just the internet really destroyed many things. The way things were done. Just the way the artist and the and the producer, the relationship, the artist and the record label relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like how they fostered these bands, these handful of bands that were signed.
Right.
In a way, it was like crazy, because you didn't have. Now it's like you go on there, there's just bands everywhere. It's just it's great on one hand, but it's not great on the other hand, because there used to be just like a stable of artists, and you got to watch those artists start out and grow on their next record and get better, and you got to see that, and that'll never happen again, because it's now you see one band have one album, and then whatever happened to that, you don't never hear from them again. It's just like so we were lucky in that way.
I dare say that I think most people in the music industry now, I would rather be able to have their music heard. Obviously, you go on YouTube, you get on Spotify, you can get your music out in front of people and get it heard. But on the other hand, there was in theory, I think a lot of people might argue against that. What I'm just going to say, which is that there was this sort of taste-making aspect to it, that in theory, what didn't always work, but that you had people who had ears who could be, were able to say, like, this band is worth signing, this band's not worth signing. We all can see from a whole bunch of different artists who were, who didn't get deals until later and then blew up, or vice versa. People who got signed to big contracts and they went nowhere. It was, it was like kind of like the NFL draft. There's all these like experts who are like, oh yeah, I know which quarterback is going to be the best quarterback. And as we see year after year, it's like only about 25% of the people are right with there's four quarterbacks. Like 25% of the people are right typically. Like they have the one and everyone else is wrong. And so, but there was that. The other thing to think about that industry, that Ted Templeman and anyone else who was an executive in that era was around, was that these bands, again, for better for worse, there was investment in them. Now again, we know how that they had to pay this money back, but then again, a company could push out hundreds of radio ads, could push out hundreds of ads in Billboard magazine, every trade magazine. If they wanted to push a band and get that name out there, they could really push that in front of people. And MTV was the other component of that. Obviously, you spend enough money in a video and you get in and get the connections at MTV going. That was a thing. In theory, right, you were able to benefit from that, which is that you had this corporation behind you that was going to help market you. And there's, in terms of to go to the Van Halen story, one of the things that Ted really wanted to talk about in the book when it came to Van Halen was that he really, they didn't even, the truth of the matter is, when Van Halen 1 was initially pressed, they didn't even press that many copies of it. Again, and that makes sense. It's an unknown artist, their first album. Obviously, it's not like, it wasn't like the Bee Gees, following up Saturday Night Fever, and you're like, oh, we're going to press 2 million copies of it because we know we're going to sell that in the first week, right? They didn't even press that many copies of it. the thinking was at Warner Brothers is like, well, this, if Ted can get these guys to 200,000 copies, maybe we can make a second record with these guys. This is sort of like a pet project of Ted's. Ted talked about how he felt kind of depressed because he was like kind of like, oh, this band is great. This band is great. People were like, yeah, they didn't quite get, not, he wasn't like people were against the band, but it was more like they were like, oh, this is just Ted's like, Ted's into this. He doesn't quite see what we all see, which is that hard rock is sort of over and this is a waste of time in some ways.
Hey, Greg, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
By the time that first album came out, how much time had Ted spent with, you talk about this in your Templeman book, how much time had he spent with Dave and working with him and his strong points as opposed to his weak points with the band? Had he got that involved by that time?
Yeah. So, the thing that's interesting is that when Ted signs these guys in February of '77, he then, he's working on Doobie Brothers and another artist. I can't remember what the other artist he was working on. It may have, it escapes me, but he had a couple of records he was doing. And so he basically signed them, went off and was working with the Doobie Brothers. Then he came back and did the demo. So the demo was done about, when I did Van Halen Rising, I didn't know the exact date the demo was done. It was done in April. Now we know because Sunset Sound has produced the paperwork. And so that's when he heard, as he talks about in the book, he heard Dave in the studio for the first time and was like, I don't know. He had some concerns about Dave's pitch and about some of the things that Dave did as a vocalist that he was like worried that was going to be, as he said, maybe not palatable to radio ears. He was just worried about some of the stuff Dave did that he didn't think was like dialed in, and so that's where, the sort of all this stuff went on where Ted was thinking like, what do I do? And what, kind of brainstorming, like, maybe I bring Sammy in and kind of like, mumbling that to himself and mentioned it to Don Landy, didn't tell the guys.
The fact that he mentioned Sammy before that 1980 is just,
well, right. And if you think about it, it makes it's just a weird coincidence in some ways that
maybe.
Well, I mean, look, I think it's a weird coincidence insofar as my personal belief is that that those guys in Van Halen didn't really know about that stuff with it, that Dave was that Ted had like issues with Dave, or that Ted had sort of kicked around the idea of Sammy in his head, basically, because as Ted told me, he was, I never would have told those guys that.
Never.
Because it could have poisoned, it would have, he's like, it could have, yeah, he's like, oh, look, I never would have told those guys that, because it could have killed Dave's, it could have poisoned the band with me. The guys could have been like, well, screw this guy, we want another producer. And Ted's like, I really wanted to work with this band. And I really, he wanted to do it. And obviously they were on board with doing that. But then this comes full circle, and then eventually Sammy's invited to join Van Halen in '85, but that's a whole nother saga. But yeah, so to answer your question, yeah, I'm long-winded, so you guys get used to that. So so awesome. that in the weeks that followed that, the demo, when Ted had free time, he would talk about it, especially at night. Ted lived in Pasadena. Ted lived in 1977, like within like a 10-minute drive from Dave's house, like 15 minutes, 10 minutes from where the Van Haleners lived. So he used to go and stop on his way home from Warner Brothers or from Sunset Sound, where he was working with another band, and go to Dave's house and go to the basement. So he talked quite a bit about that, where he was like, that's when I started to really like sit down and listen, because he's like, all right, I gotta figure out what to do with Dave. I gotta figure out like basically what's gonna work and what I can do with this, and that's where he started to really see
Dave's house. That's his dad's place, right?
Right. Yeah, the Pasadena house. Right. Yeah, the mansion. Right. So he would go down to the basement, and watch the rehearsals and take notes. He had notebooks, and he would take notes on songs he liked, songs he didn't like, and that's where he said he really started to talk to Dave and spend a lot of time chatting with him, and sort of realized that this guy is super smart. He writes really good lyrics. He's got that sort of X factor that a lot of guys don't have. And he, basically saying you could be the greatest singer in the world, but you have to be able to sell the songs, basically. And that was sort of Ted's, one of the things Ted was talking about. And, Ted's not stupid. Ted understands there's plenty of guys with unorthodox vocal approaches, Jagger, go through all these guys, that work just fine, right, in a band context. They don't have like this, like they're not all Steve Perry, right? So Ted understood that.
Sure.
So once he sort of got that time with Dave, he said he did like a complete 180. He was like, this is the right guy. This is gonna be great. Basically, he's like Ted kind of like, as a guy who was a vocalist himself and had done a lot of producing of records at that point, and understood after a while like what Dave did well and what Dave didn't do so well. And he's like, but look, that's that's not singular to the experience with Dave. That's any singer with any producer. For the most part, you're going to have somebody who's going to say, try to do more of this. This is better. Like you sound better in this key, or this is better. Like, I mean, anybody, pretty much. So he became a big David Lee Roth fan, as people know if they've read the book. When the band is splitting in 1985, Ted is adamant that he does not want Sammy in Van Halen, not because he doesn't like Sammy, not because Sammy's not his friend, that he doesn't think Sammy's a great singer. Yeah. All those things. It's just that he thought it wasn't going to be Van Halen anymore, that it was going to change the.
And he just thought it was going to be like, oh, they're just going to fight for a few months and then they'll just patch it up. But then as soon as Sammy was in the picture, Ted was kind of like, oh no, this
yeah. I mean, I think what was thinking that he told me that I was really surprised. I mean, Ted told me a lot of things that surprised me, obviously. One of the things he really surprised me with was that, as an outsider, as a kid, I never had the impression, I mean, again, just like reading whatever magazines and listening to whatever interviews you hear, I never had the impression like Dave's coming back, like Dave's on his way back in the band. But I think from Ted's perspective, he kind of saw it as like a Black Sabbath Dio type of thing, where eventually he thought like it would run its course and you get Ozzy back, right? And of course that didn't happen. But I think Ted finally thought like, oh well, they get the one guy, and that's not the right analogy. There's another band that could come to mind, but you do the one album with the other singer and then you patch it up, right? And you go back to the.
He had just got through putting 6 to 7 years of his life into the band Van Halen with Roth. He helped hone and mold that band into what it was. So it was his creation. I don't blame him for not wanting Sammy in the band, because why would he want to take a completely different path than something that he had already put that much of his time and effort into successfully?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways it's hard for people to understand, because the flip side of that is like, out of all the singers in the world, whatever, coincidentally or not, right? Ed has always stuck to the story that he went to get his car fixed. He always stuck to the story. He went to get his car fixed. And Claudio, the mechanic, said, you should call my friend Sammy, and of course, Ed, Al, all those guys were big fans of the first Montrose record. They knew Sammy's work. They had met Sammy on the road. There's some interesting, like if you go back, it's really interesting to see some interviews with Sammy from like 79 and 80, where he's like throwing Roth under the bus. He's like actually criticizing Roth. I mean, for whatever reason, that's the sort of thing. It's like, did Roth somehow suspect? I don't know. Like Ted always was adamant that I never told those guys. I never wanted them to know. They never knew. But for whatever reason, maybe it was just the egos. Maybe it was just like the lead singer ego, like Sammy meets Dave, and it had nothing to do with anything that happened before.
I honestly believe that Sammy was threatened by Roth. I honestly did.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm just, of course, it's like the whole thing, the whole Sammy Dave thing is always like, causes me great joy to talk about this.
Please,
sure, of course.
When Dave left the band, Ted was on board with his new project immediately.
Yeah, and that's like, that's another thing that I know from working with Ted on the book, that Ted, really felt that his motives were pure with going to do the thing with Dave. Like he had told me over and over again, if I knew that basically what he basically gathered, that that the brothers felt betrayed or basically were angry about the EP, he's like, I never would have done it. I never would have done it. I think he, in the book, he tried to explain it the best he could, which is that he thought it was like going to give the band breathing room. He's like, okay, look, Dave was frustrated with stuff that went on with the making of 1984. I was frustrated about it. And we just wanted to give everyone a chance to sort of catch their breath. In other words, just take the pressure off, and this would actually, allow them to spend some time apart from each other, do something where Dave gets something out of his system, and then everything was going to go back. And of course, there was stuff that was going on. As Ted told me, he's like, they never fought in front of me, really. Like, he's like, they never, he would tell me, like, occasionally I would go up to the studio and things would be askew, and I'd kind of like assumed there had been some sort of like whoever something had happened, like something physical had happened. He never said like who would happen, but like he never saw like he said I never saw Dave and Ed scream at each other. He's like I never saw Alex and Eddie like really fight. Like I mean he said they got like they would yell at each other. But he never saw like fight. And he kind of gave me an analogy like that he was like he was like the gym teacher / like principal because he was like because he was an executive at Warner Brothers, so like he always thought like those guys were all like here comes Ted, stop whatever we're doing, like because you didn't want like a vice president of the record company thinking your band is like dysfunctional. And so obviously he knew there was frustrations inside the band, like whatever that Dave and Ed weren't getting along. At times there's a lot of creative tension and there was stuff that was difficult, but this look, he had dealt with the Doobie Brothers, he dealt with a whole host of different artists where that had been kind of baked in the cakes. So, but yeah, he was always he was very surprised when it was like at the breaking point. He was always like, "Are you serious? You guys can't figure it out, basically."
So I perceived in the book if they'd have waited a little while longer, Dave would have come back.
Yeah, that's what I got that feeling too. That was the thought.
If that, just a little while longer, Ted thought.
Well, I think what Ted thinks is that if Sammy hadn't appeared, that there is more likely than not that eventually that would have repaired itself. And I think Ted may have said that in the book, but that was basically part of what. In other words. I don't think he said this and we put this in the book. But I'll put it in my own words. It was sort of like if there's a marital dispute and the husband and wife have separated and suddenly another man shows up, right, and sort of presents themselves to the wife who's been separated from the husband. There's more likely that there's a chance that the wife might say, well, screw my soon to be ex-husband. This guy looks great. And I think that's kind of what Ted was, but look, that was in some ways you can't blame Ed and Alex for being like, Dave's basically in their mind, Dave's walked out on us, screw him. We're getting another singer. We're not going to basically be held hostage to Dave's movie or whatever Dave was up to at that time. So, but yeah, I think that that's just sort of, Ted's take. I mean, is it realistic in some ways? I mean, yeah, I mean, you can't, I don't think he really, if you asked him, like pinned him down, did you really expect the brothers to sit around, wait for 6 months till Dave decided he was going to come back and want to work again or something? I'm sure he would say no. But I think, just ultimately he felt like, I think he probably felt that like it would have repaired itself. I think he probably said in the book, he thought it would have repaired itself. But when Sammy showed and they had another option, it was like, no, we're not going to, meaning the Dave dug in his heels. He's like, screw those guys. And it's, vice versa.
Yeah, I think that, obviously we all know the tension built. It was always there between Dave and the rest of them. They didn't like to be being told how to dress or what to do or whatever,
Sure.
As the years went on. And I think when Ed started to take control of after Diver Down, when he obviously wasn't happy. We all know that. We'll talk about that. But and when he built the studio, and I guess that was a huge, chapter in this story when that came out, because he wanted control. And then I guess he felt after that, we're not going to let Dave thinks that it's about him. It's not, he doesn't need us. Like, oh, I can lose these guys. I'm the star. Right. And I think they're like, well, you know what? Go be a star and we'll go do our own thing. But
when Dave left that band, though, a lot of the members of that camp employed there went with Dave. Yeah. And I always all along thought that it was Ted's influence that
I never got that feeling.
That happen. Ted's in the industry. If Ted's going with Dave, then a lot of the others are too.
I don't think Ted was really going with Dave, because wasn't he always a confidant to like Ed even afterwards? Didn't he do the track listing for 5150, the order of the song?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was.
Weren't they trying to bring him on and he said, "I'm committed to Dave for."
I think they were okay with that, right? They were like,
so yeah. I mean, I think there were definitely some bruised egos and some feelings that would have had to been worked out. I think on both sides. I think Ted's experience in making 1984 was really, really difficult. It was, I think Ted's, Ted's ego was bruised in some sort of way by the experience. And I'm sure, and the flip side is that I'm sure that, Ed felt, betrayed by the sort of like Dave is going off and Ted's going with him. And so I think a lot of that stuff would have had to been patched over. I think that there was definitely a push from Warner Brothers basically to say, okay, we have this sort of unstable Van Halen now without a singer. We have a singer coming in. We want a named producer to be on it, right? They weren't going to let, from what I understand, I think Eddie said that they weren't going to let just basically Don and Ed produce it. Like basically Warner Brothers, the president, Lenny Waronker, was going to say, yeah, no, we're not going to let you guys. You have to have somebody, an outside ear, an outside party to kind of come in to sort of like, to be there. And so I think Ted was sort of the default. Like basically, I always got the impression from Ted that the powers inside Warner Brothers were like, you're the guy, go do it. And Ted, who had working for Warner Brothers, is like, obviously I can do it. I know these guys, I can like, we can make it work. And, again, there was never, like Ted said, he's like, I never like had like hatred for those guys or anything like that. It was just like, he was just like pissed off that it went like so bad. Like, why did it have to be like that? That's Ted always say, like, it didn't have to be like that. He's like, I just was so frustrated at how it got so crazy. Cause he's like, it didn't have to be that way. If we just sat down and talked, and that was Ted's basic, and I'm sure, if you read the book, Ted realizes he wishes he had done things differently. He said, look, I should have done things. I should have done some things differently. I should have been more accepting of Ed's desire to be more of a producer. Like, I should have been more like, basically he in retrospect, he realizes there's things he could have done to, as he said, to make things less crazy. But he also realizes that he wasn't the only one up there, doing stuff that made it crazy. But I think, at the end of the day, I think when Ted never said this to me, but I always kind of suspected, like just based on what I know, is like that when Dave was like, I'm going to make a record this fall, because Dave was going to make the record in the fall of '85, do his movie, and all. Like there's basically this whole thing that was going to come out, like boom, 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 and then the movie got derailed, and they were sort of caught in a holding pattern. And then they went and they finished the album. So in theory, right, all of the music for the soundtrack, the movie soundtrack, would have been done at the same time that 5150 was going to be recorded. So Ted's like, I could have done both, but I also think like, that would have been super awkward, right? Like, how was your morning, Ted? Yeah. Oh, great. I'm down the street with Dave at Sunset Sound or whatever, doing a record. Now he's up at 5150. I think that would have been a non-starter. So, but yes, you're right. In terms of like, in terms of sequencing the records, they used to go, Don and Ed actually used to, asked Ted's advice about 5150, UA12. And he told me that, I was kind of like blown away. He was like, oh yeah, it's like, they would just, they would basically go, I have these tracks, what do you think? And, I think it was just, there was just some weirdness there, right? There was just some sort of weirdness that was never, again, like, that like, when Ed called to do Private Life, or Ed called to do the fuck record, that Ted said, sure, I'll, no problem. I'll do this record. That was never an issue, but I think there was just, there was, it didn't end the way that I think that Ted wanted to end in terms of that last record with those guys, with the raw thing. Like he just, the album came out, it did so well and everything, but he just said like, it was just making it was difficult. Let's just say.
Yeah. Eddie Notorious seems to like, he can hold a grudge. We all kind of got that feeling over the years that he could hold a grudge, but I never got that feeling that there was with Ted. I always thought he, respected Ted, even though, I didn't think there was any really bad blood, because like, with him, maybe like you said, each other's feathers a bit, but I think, even up to the very end, you hear Ted was calling him on the phone, and Don was calling him, and while he was sick, he couldn't even talk anymore, Ed, and they were making him laugh on the phone, and So.
Yeah, I think that. Look, I think I can't speak for that, for the inside of that relationship, but I know that Ted had a real love for Ed as a person, just that he just thought like there was this guy who was like this musical genius who. He had such an, again, all of the artists he worked with, and he had these relationships with Michael McDonald. He's had disagreements with Michael McDonald. He's had disagreements with the guys in the Doobie Brothers. He has a real deep love for those guys, because they worked together to make this music. I mean, that's the thing. He's like, it's just, he would just be like, oh, it was, so amazing to do this. And it was just, he would get so excited about talking about this. And I think that to me, that was that he felt a personal affection for Ed as a person, because he saw this guy with so much talent like too. The other thing that Ted always talked about that he loved most of all, he said, look, I loved taking these guys, whether it was the Doobie, again, not taking them, but basically being able to be a part of helping somebody go from like the Doobie Brothers eating beans out of cans, the Van Halen brothers tying the doors of their cars closed with guitar strings, to Nicolette Larson to being a background singer. She was a very good background singer, like a super talented one, but to be have a top 5 hit. Right. Ted said that was the thing I loved most of all, was basically taking people from obscurity and to fame. And I think for Ted to have it be so big for the Van Halen thing, and to be, sort of that he sort of was at the very, ground floor of that, and sort of seeing that talent, that was a special thing for him. And he always, I think he also felt a lot of empathy for Ed, because I think he recognized that, look, he wasn't built for, for however we want to look at guys like Sammy and Dave. They're definitely more built for like the fame thing. They like embrace it in a way that Ed never really wanted. And I think that Ted always was like, he was a shy guy. Like he was like, he had a lot of pressure put on him to be something that probably he wasn't naturally wanting to be, and also had the pressure of writing the music. And so I think that Ted always had like a great affection for Ed, because he delivered some over and over again. Like he'd be like, I'd say like, could we do something different? Like he talked to me at the rehearsals before the first record. That was one of the great stories. It would give me chills. He'd be like, I'd say, that part, it's not quite right. And Ed and I would look at each other, and Ed would go, what about this? And he'd be like, he'd come up with something even fucking better. Like he'd be like, the other thing was really good, but it was like, I was like just asking, and it'd be like, holy shit, that's even better. Like I think that to have that level of talent, in a relationship with you as a producer, I think that was really like, you're just like, God damn, like that's so amazing. He would talk about that. And, he always, whatever we talked about, even like, the stuff that was difficult at times, he always, was, I think, understanding about Ed's position. Like, I wish he had said this to me, like, whatever. I wish, nobody told, he never said to me, he would say that he didn't like the covers on Diver Down at the time. Why didn't he just say it? Why didn't he sit me down? And I would have tried to explain to him, we're stuck. I don't want to do, I don't want to do all these covers. We have these great songs. We have to basically, he always felt badly after the fact, when he felt like, especially Ed, but any of his artists, he said, if I ever felt like any of my artists were disappointed or upset with a record, or they didn't like something, because I hated that. He's like, that wasn't the way I wanted to make records. You can't make everybody happy, but you especially don't want the songwriter, so to speak, and the person who's like the main person, to feel as if they're disappointed with something. And obviously, like, you have like 6 or 7 guys in the band.
Well, yeah, of course. Ed wanted to make his own music. Ted, if it's proven, it's proven. Dave's on go anyway, so of course,
which brings us.
Sorry, go on, John.
Yeah, which brings us to Diver Down. Let's go.
Yeah.
Well, I've got a question, because on that note, talking about their own music, I noticed something that I experienced, and I'm sure a lot of people in the chat did. I know you guys did. There was a shift from the 70s to the 80s. It was really, really interesting. And like when I came, okay. And just to make a note, a lot of times when we're comparing things about Van Halen, we talk about the Roth era and the Hagar era first. And that's like the first and foremost topic of conversation many of the times. But back when Van Halen was new and they were playing in the clubs, they were playing all cover tunes, all cover tunes. Those days in Gazzari's, they weren't playing original songs because Bill wouldn't let them. And when they tried, he got pissed. He got pissed. And so, and Greg, if I'm getting anything wrong, that's why I'm doing this right now, because you're my filter, brother. Okay. And you're gonna get a kick out of this.
Fair enough.
You're a historian, and this is right up your alley, my brother. So I digress. Let me just go with this. When they made the shift in the clubs from playing all of the cover tunes, for one, they did it for years, and playing all those cover tunes gave them powerful tools to write songs and entertain people, because they've been, not only have they been going through it playing the cover songs, they've been writing their own stuff and creating their own sound. when they shifted in Hollywood from all cover tunes to all original music, not only did they change the venues they played, that's when I remember the Whiskey a Go-Go. The first time in 78 when they played the Whiskey, it was all original music from one of the first times ever, if I'm correct. Played a couple of cover tunes that they still did, but it was like 80% all new original music. The venues changed. Now, something else occurred that I noticed. When I grew up in the 70s, I was listening to bands like Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, obviously Sabbath, The Who, right? Then, as I got older in the 70s, I morphed into bands like Judas Priest, The Scorpions, Iron Maiden, UFO, Def Leppard. Every band I just named, every single band is from England. Okay. Now, there were American bands coming out of the US going abroad, but the ratio in my world was 90 to 95% all English bands in my immediate world. And in 1978, things started changing. The band Kiss, an American rock band, came into view, but they didn't have even 1/10 the impact on me that Van Halen had. And after Van Halen hit, my music list changed from that to bands like Great White, Motley Crue, Rat, Dokken, Warrant. We can go on and on. And so my question to you, Greg, is this. Did Van Halen start the American invasion of the world, the exact opposite of what the Beatles did in the 60s, from English out to the rest of the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like accurate. I think what's interesting is that it didn't happen right away, right? But there's no question that bands in LA, whether it be bands like, I don't know, Carlos Cavazo was in a band called Snow.
Yes, he was.
Before Quiet Riot. There's a band, this Dubrow, which was like Quiet Riot. There was Dante Fox, which was Great White. There's a band called Exciter, which was George Lynch's band.
Yeah.
Dokken with Don Dokken.
Yep.
There was a band called Stormer, which never got a record deal, but were played.
I can't believe you brought them out of the woodwork. Stormer. I hadn't heard their name in a long time, dude. That's cool.
It's a blessing and a curse. This is the stuff that my wife says is why I don't remember to do stuff around the house. I'm thinking about bands like Stormer, right?
You have no excuse. That's
right. But it's like if you look like what was going on at the Whiskey in '81, there was a new wave thing was really what was probably more band like the Plimsolls, which were coming out. They were great band, right? There were bands like Fear, which are more straight up punk bands and stuff like that. So, but then, eventually like the Motley Crue thing happened and Quiet Riot happened. So, it's almost like it just Van Halen ran up against the Van Halen thing was such a contrast to what the trend was with punk rock and new wave, soft rock. I mean, talk about that in the book. That's one of the big arguments I try to make in the book is that, Van Halen, they sort of launch and they get huge, and it's sort of an anomaly in some sort of ways in terms of what was going on in the music industry in general. There were bands like Kix that was in Baltimore. They didn't really get big till later in the 80s too. So it was almost like, Van Halen plants the seed, and all these bands are still, these guys in LA, especially these musicians, George Lynch and Randy Rhoads and all these guys are still out there. They're still trying to sort of, they're trying to do that thing, and it's not happening right away. But then, of course, by like 84 and 85, you walk around Los Angeles, it's like, it's Van Halen, Cloneville, basically. Like, there's a few bands that are obviously the big influences on these bands, like Led Zeppelin, Kiss, and Van Halen. Probably the three big ones, I would say. Aerosmith, they probably were the biggest ones on the 80s. Definitely in LA, it was, Van Halen was, in other words, if you talk to those guys in those bands, like you talk to the one Mark Kendall, such a great guy. You talk to him, he's like, man, he saw Van Halen in the backyards. He's like, man, we all wanted to be Van Halen. Like, he's like, we just, and he kind of said, like, we just kept at it. Like, he was in little backyard party band, and then he got in Dante Fox, which ended up playing on the Strip, and they got a deal.
Man, Dante Fox. I hadn't thought about Dante Fox in 30 years, Greg. Greg, I used to
if I could just monetize this, right? Like in the right way. It's not enough love for Dante Fox information. I love Mark Kendall. I love those guys. Yeah.
Those guys are great. Well, you're giving me a road down memory lane. In 1980, 81, and 82, I was a backstage bouncer of the Whiskey A Go-Go. So I got to see every band you were just talking about. I got to see them up front and close. And we talk about that a lot of the time on the show.
There's, like bands like Gary Myrick and the Figures. I don't know if you remember them. They had a song, She Walks in, or She Moves in Stereo, I think the song was called. I mean, it's like, that was sort of like the more dominant sound in LA, like that new wave power pop sound. The Knack, right? The Knack is the other group we haven't talked about. That, and so, but eventually, like the Van Halen thing kind of like caught fire. It just took a while, like 83, 84. That's really Rat and all that. It started happening big time. So,
wow.
Okay, so Van Halen is responsible for hair metal. Now, next. No,
all right, so we got to turn the curb here, and let's get to some roll call. All right, so if you're in the chat, kids, say hi so I don't have to scroll back too far. G Green 23, welcome. Nelson Rodriguez.
Nelson, what's going on, guys?
I see Sandra out there. Ed is Christopher Live. Sawa, Holly Lewis.
Holly, how you doing, sweetheart?
All right. So I'm scrolling upwards anyway. Chris Hunter, Jeff K, Daryl Alber.
Hey, Daryl's my buddy.
Oh, welcome.
Welcome, man. Welcome.
All right. So Thomas Santiago, Gretsch Zeppelin, if you're lurking out there, say hello. All right. So we're at 47 minutes now, and this is our second blast at our interactive listening party. We're going to listen all together to Diver Down. So everyone, cue up your Diver Down now and pause it and hold tight, and we're going to start this here soon. A little later on, we'll do some Van Halen trivia. Or should we say some Greg Renoff trivia? Yeah. So if you have read either of these two books, you might know the answer. And if you do, we'll give you $1 million Van Halen bucks. And a couple of Halenville picks for you. Yeah. We'll do that a little later on. Yeah. And we'll show you something cool that goes kind of with the trivia with Greg's inspired trivia for tonight. Yeah, so we are going to dive into...
Let's go.
Diver Down, everybody. Are you ready? All right. Okay, so... Get your Diver Down ready, and are we going to count this down
again? Yeah, let's go for it.
Is that what we're going to do?
Fancy video graphic there. Put it up there.
All right. So get your Diver Down ready. We're going to count this down in 5.
I hear it.
All right, all right.
All right. So, you know, somebody had pointed out that the end of Secret, is it the end of, I'm trying to think, is it Where Have All the Good Times Gone? The symbols it's backwards on the end of Secrets, right? Something like that. Am I right? Anybody know that?
Yeah, there is a flip. I can't remember what it is, but yeah, like the symbols. Yeah.
So Where Have All the Good Times Gone is basically a cover of the David Bowie cover of the Kinks, really, right?
Correct.
It's not really it's more like the Bowie cover than the Kinks original song.
I think they give Ray Davies the writing credit though on the album.
Oh yeah, they have to.
Yeah, the Kinks have like homes, cars, yachts, thanks to Van Halen.
I remember Ray Davies saying once when they were going to play "You Really Got Me," he goes, "We're gonna do a Van Halen song right now," you know.
Good for him.
Yeah, but so you know, this album is much maligned by a lot of people, and it's primarily because Eddie kind of trashed it, and a lot of the fans all jumped on and said, "Yeah, it sucks," or whatever like that. But I you know, maybe this is like blasphemy or something, but I think Diver Down is one of the most accurate representations of Van Halen as a band out of every album, simply because their personalities and characters, what they brought to this band, is clearly on display on this album. The element that Dave brought, the you know, the Big Bad Bill, that whole just fun vibe, and you know, that's him. That whole, you know, vaudeville shtick kind of thing like that it's like, and it's done to perfection on this. And then the musical genius on the couple original tracks that are on here are just like incredible, you know. And the fact that they were able to throw this together in a couple of weeks, this album, it's just like it's mind blowing how
one of the fastest albums that they produced, actually, I believe. Didn't they do this within like a month or something like that?
This is a couple of weeks, right?
Yeah.
You know, I should know exactly how long it took. You know, it was fast enough that Templeman told me that it was extremely stressful, the mixing process for him and Don Landy, because they were like out of time. Like the deadline was like insane that they were trying to make. You know, basically they were trying to chase that single. You know, the Pretty Woman single was out and it had like done surprisingly well.
January.
Yeah, it came out and then you know,
April, right? So
they you know, it was basically from like, oh, there's no album on the horizon for Van Halen to like go do an album really quick. Van Halen's management and Warner Brothers, the top people at Warner Brothers, were suddenly, you know, in agreement that this album needed to be done super fast, you know. And real quick, Ted's basic take was, I was like, well, they did the single. He's like, well, yeah, but the thing about a single is it's like a single is only useful to promote a record. Basically, you know, it's like if you want to do a single for fun, that's fine, but like especially if you have a hit like that, you know. I think his basic takeaway was like, if Pretty Woman had bombed, they would not have been pressed to do a record. It was suddenly like everyone's talking about, man, like all these basically all the record stores are like going, wow, we're selling this Van Halen single. We'd be great if we could have an album, right? Suddenly, like, you know, the record companies want to make money. Warner Brothers is like, oh, you know, there's all this demand for a Van Halen product. We need an album. Come on, guys. You know, Diver Down suddenly had to be this thing that had to be done fast. And I think the other thing is to think about is that Fair Warning had not sold as well as they had hoped. And so that was the other thing, was that there was a hope to sort of like right the ship, so to speak, like, okay, we got to get this thing fixed. And so to speak, and again, I'm overstating that. It wasn't like anyone was like, oh, my Van Halen's over or something like that, but it's basically that there wasn't a single off of Fair Warning. As much as we love it, there wasn't like a radio hit, right? Like there had been like Dance the Night Away, You Really Got Me. There wasn't a radio hit.
As a fan, when this first came out, you know, you always, as a fan, the anticipation of the new album was always awaited. When the first song played, it set the tone for the entire album. And whether it was a specific riff or maybe a bass tone coming up out of the depths, or you know, the starting a horn in the distance coming in, like in Running with the Devil. Every album they came out with was an anticipated moment of a start of that gift they gave. What I noticed the most about this album was the only real negative that as a fan I got from this album was the story you just told about how they were rushed to get it out. That's it. Because as an album, this is wonderful.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
The guitar work is outstanding. The only thing about this album that I wish they had done is take the full bug and put it in the first song, because that, I bet they'd have sold more albums if they had, because that song was so catchy, and it didn't come out first.
I think maybe it was maybe they looked at it and thought it was a little top heavy. You know?
No, but the fans wanted top heavy. That's all. Give it to us. Give it to us. I mean, this was for kids. I think I was 23 when this album came out. And they were competing with bands like Iron Maiden, Judas Priest. They were competing with Scorpions. Holy shit. They were competing with the Scorpions at that time. And
I was 16.
When there was a real necessity for them to come out with heavy hits, and they didn't disappoint me at all with this album.
Well, after Fair Warning, though, as a young, rabid Van Halen fan, they could have put anything out at that point, and we'd have loved it.
They were ready to explode on the big scale. They were ready, and this album really, because it was very accessible to everybody, girls, guys. It was in my high school. I remember this was the album of the summer. It was just like the party album. This was played over and over, and to think that I'm just Hang 'Em High is just ending for me here, but that was really the only old song I think on the album, other than the covers. But I think that was the only one they reached back and kind of everything else. Like Secrets was new, I believe. I guess Little Guitars and Full Bug were new also, right? They were.
I'm going into track number 3.
Cathedral now, right?
Yeah. Ed has said, I thought in an interview in like 1982, he said that they were considering Some Big Trouble, which is from the demo, and that would have been a really good fit for the record. And look, I think that, the thing I've really come to think more and more about this is that if you're Eddie Van Halen and you have all of this music you're written, I can understand like why making the record may have been fun and doing basically like the album came out and you have the buzz, the record's out and you go on tour. I can imagine how that really sort of stuck in his craw in some ways. He's like that basically Warner Brothers forced this record out fast, and I had music that I couldn't finish. And I think the thing, of course, is we'll get to Dancing in the Streets, but that was the thing that ultimately, for Ted, he talked to me about that so much, because I think from his perspective, again, Ed would have a different perspective, is that he felt like it solved a musical puzzle that was like so frustrating. And that he really was trying to finish the record and thought this was like this really cool thing that had come of this riff, and understanding now that, after the fact that Ed had wanted it for an original song, and it basically, as Ted says, Ed didn't protest. Ed said, okay, sounds good, great. But in the time, you can imagine everyone's under the deadline. You're trying to finish, and basically you walk away and you go, I really didn't want to do that, but I felt like I had to, because we're trying to finish the record.
It's just crazy how maligned this album is. And as we're listening to it, it's just like, this is the album to me where Alex's snare sound really the first time you could hear bits of it on other albums here and there, Fair Warning a little bit, but nothing. Now on Diver Down, it was complete. It had arrived. Alex's signature, his voice was finally there. You know what I mean? I think this is the album that it arrived on. That's why I think that they were, they were big, but they were ready to explode and become part of the public conscious, which they did on the next album on 1984. That was when every grandma knew Jump. You know what I mean? It was just like they'd all heard of Van Halen at that point. It's like a different level that bands get to. Not every band attains that level, I don't think either. You know what I mean? And I think
something like this too with Secrets we're listening to right now. I mean, I love this song. I love this. And it's like it's such it's people always talk about how Van Halen's like the party band and all this stuff. And this is like it's a love song. But you never you listen to it, you never really think about it like it's not like a Journey style love song, like a love ballad, like you're longing for someone. But it's like it is what he's like, and that's where where Ted would talk about Dave was a genius with lyrics. He's like, this is the type of stuff he says people don't appreciate this the right way, that he wrote this love song basically, which isn't a conventional
I
love
agree.
song.
We've talked about that before recently, Greg. Yeah.
And
absolutely.
And I don't want to jump ahead. We know that Pretty Woman's coming up, but even Michael Anthony, he sings as much lead vocal on that song as Dave does. When you think about it, that harmony, Michael Anthony is throughout the whole song. So I mean, it's just I think everything came into focus on this album, and for an album that's so like trash, you know, like, because of Eddie basically telling everybody throughout the years that, you know, I hate that album, whatever like that. But I feel the opposite of that. I think this album was a hugely important album for what it was in their career, you know what I mean? And for what was to come on 1984, you know?
And I think we've already kind of alluded to this too. It's like, I say to people on Twitter that like get all like, you know, they get all angry. Right? I'm always like, you know, obviously a lot of it's tongue in cheek, but like people are like always like going crazy about Diver Down when I say I love it and stuff like that. It's like this is what, like we already mentioned, like Charles was mentioning, like the cover songs and everything. This is what Van Halen basically made their bones on, which is like taking cover songs and making them their own. Like where have all the good times gone? You know, I love that version. The Kinks song, its version's okay, but it's like I don't even think about it as a Kinks song. Like I don't even think about where have all the good times gone. Is it, you know, I understand the Kinks wrote it, I get it, right? But I don't think about it as a Kinks song. And it's like it's all the stuff between the Full Bug, the Boogie song, the Happy Trails, which I always think is like, you know, so ballsy that they did that, and it's so fun. Like you're in such a good mood when you hear that, and like the acoustic, all the little Eddie-isms and all the little, you know, the little guitars, the cathedral, all the sort of Eddie instrumentals. It's like it's all the elements of what makes Van Halen great. Again, you can say like there should have been more originals, and I understand why Eddie like probably was like if I had 6 weeks, I could have given them 5 awesome original songs we should have on this record. And I get that. Right? It didn't happen, but like, why would you trash? I don't want to talk about Eddie. Eddie's, you know, he obviously rest in peace. He can, you know, said whatever he wanted. It's his record, it's his music. But like, why would a fan be like, this sucks? I just don't understand. Like, it's okay for the guy who's in the band to say, I didn't like it because I felt, you know, whatever, it didn't go the way I wanted in terms of the way it should have went. I get that. That's fair. Totally fair, obviously. But like to be like, this sucks. It's like, come on. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I can't wrap my head around it.
A little trivia that I kind of remember from way back then is that Eddie recorded the guitar solo for Secrets and I think Dancing in the Streets the same day, right after each other, I think.
Wow. Wow.
If you're listening to them, I mean, those are 2 pretty killer solos. I guess they overdubbed them on the same day for both of those, I remember.
So the other great trivia on this, which we were listening to Intruder right now, is like I think Ted told me, that Dave played the keyboards on this. And I was like, because he's like, this is a live take. He's like, Dave played the keyboards. And I was like, really? He's like, oh yeah. You know, he's like, just like a one finger type of thing on the keyboard, but he's like, Dave played it.
Oh, really?
And, yeah. And then at some point I came up and actually Wolfie, which was like, wasn't nice. You know, it's like, yeah, he's actually, that's right. He's like, you know, he wasn't like saying like, Greg's right. You know, like, but he was basically like, someone was saying like, it's not true. And he's like, well, actually it is true.
Yeah.
He's like, because it was live. Ed was playing the guitar. Dave played the keyboards, the bass, the drums, right? This instrumental has that, you know, that unusual thing where Dave played keyboards on a Van Halen song.
And the story is...
So we want to blame the keyboard trajectory of Van Halen. Dave's the guy who's at fault. It's not Ed. It's Dave.
Is that in the book, Greg?
I don't think that is in the book. I don't think, because I don't think it, I don't know if, you know, there was a lot of things like threads tried to connect together. It may not have come up until, like, you know, after I had written that part of the book. I probably didn't go back and it might be in the book. I don't think it is, but Ted told me, yeah, and it makes sense, right? It has to be. He's like, it's a live take. There was no overdubs. This is live.
And the claim is that the video for Pretty Woman was too long, so they went in and they just jammed that, made it up to.
Right. That's what, video, and that's what. Right. That was Ted. That's what Ted's recollection was. He was like, you know, Ted was of the opinion that he's like, I didn't like this. He doesn't like this that much. He's like, I still think it's great. Like, you know, he's like, if they wanted to pick a cover song to do, he's like, I think he said in the book, he said, I could have thought, but you know, brainstormed up 10 other songs that would have been better for Van Halen to do. He said, it's fine, but they wanted to do it. It's fine. They want to do the song. Then they want to do the video, and they come back, and he's like, they want to go back in the studio and do this instrumental because they needed more music, you know. And you know, Ted was like, this seemed backwards to me. But of course he did it, right? He did it. He's got those guys back, and he's like, okay, they want to do it, that's fine. But he's like, it didn't make sense to me to sort of have the video. Again, we're sort of entering the MTV era. We're like, the video is sort of driving the you know, again, but it was just a single, right? It was just meant to be like a 45, which, so it wasn't like this, you know, massive undertaking to do it. But that was where they went back and then they cut the second piece of it, which is the instrumental.
And they also left a part out of the original Roy Orbison song. Eddie says we never learned it or whatever like that. So they just, I mean, is it right at this part that I'm listening?
Yeah, to? Right. So there is another like part where they didn't learn, you know, but
they didn't even learn it. So.
I hear this on the radio all the time. The song, all the time, you know, and so, I shouldn't remember where it peaked. I can't remember where it peaked, but it did very well. Like it charted, and again, that's what I meant about Fair Warning. I wasn't trying
22 or something. Was it?
Yeah. And again, I wasn't trying to I love Fair Warning as much as anybody. Right. But it was I think the part of the thing was that when Warner Brothers, I suspect when they saw, Van Halen could do the single thing for again, just like 1979, where they go back to Dance the Night Away, they can get up. Come on. Let's get the record. We got to have a record to sell, and we want a tour. Because the tour sells. Again, you get the record out, you go on tour. The tour sells the records, the whole 9 yards. So they were pressed to do this.
We talked about did as much music as they had, as Ed had, and they had. Didn't they have any when it came time to make that record? I mean,
Diver Down.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was the demo, and I think that's part and parcel of what is kind of interesting, because they could have done more from the demo, right? And again, is that I think if you heard from Ed, right, what he would have said was that was Ted and Dave wanted to do more covers, right? So the one cover was already baked in the cake. Pretty Woman was already done. Then it was Where Have All the Good Times Gone, the Kinks song. They have this one, right, which is obviously the infamous one on the record. And then there's Happy Trails, which again is a cover, but it's 40 seconds long. I don't really think.
And they're
1 minute 5 seconds.
A minute 5 seconds long. Fair enough.
Their Father song is a cover also.
There's actually 4 songs of the 12 that are really one is a minute 23 seconds. Cathedral.
Right.
The Intruder is a minute 39 seconds. There's 4 elements of that album that are counted as songs that are really, if you take all their time and put it together, it equals about 1.5 to 2 of the regular songs on the album.
It was worth it to. It was
exactly
worth it to get It was worth it to get the 3 originals, little guitars. I mean, the full.
Oh yeah.
I mean, listen, and Hang 'em High. It was just like that. That's worth it. That for me, I could care less, right?
And again, I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect part of what the deal was is that probably Dave would have wanted to rewrite the lyrics, and I don't know again, if that was one of the stumbling blocks too. You're under a lot of pressure, and it's suddenly a lot of the lyrics from 1977 were there's some stuff in there that probably would not have translated as well. I think Dave had matured as a writer, right? So there's probably stuff he would have rewritten. I don't know if that was part of it too. I can't imagine that they would have changed the music on Big Trouble, that they would have but again, the other thing was Ted picked the songs, right? Ultimately, at the end of the day,
right, Ted
was the guy who, again, in conversation with them would kind of be would be the tiebreaker and stuff like that. If it's what about, Ted would be the one who would have the ultimate say on that. So, maybe, I don't know. Ted didn't remember, it was 30 years ago. He didn't remember anything about Big Trouble. It may have been just sort of discussed. And, but there is a really interesting thought to be had too. The other thing too, and I don't think people will necessarily appreciate this as much as they should, is that, in fairness to Ed, this was money taken out of his pocket in some ways, the band's pockets, right? Because, and again, look, that was never the design of Ted Templeman or Dave, obviously. I mean, Dave, Dave would want to get paid too, but it's basically, you can imagine if they're looking at this and they're going, a lot of the publishing money, if we had put original songs, how many records you get to make? They don't know. This could be the last Van Halen record album, or the next one might be the last one. That's, half of that record, the money's going to the Kinks, the publishing money. The money's going to Roy, I'm trying to think of the guy who wrote Happy Trails. I can't come up with the cowboy who came out.
Roy Rogers, right?
Yeah, Roy Rogers.
Yeah, Dale.
Anyway,
Dale, his wife, Dale. Dale.
Oh God,
yeah.
Someone tell us in the chat. This is where we can go. Tell us in the chat.
We can say a lot of things about Diver Down in hindsight, but I always looked at Diver Down as Van Halen's gateway from the early days to the future. I mean, as a lifer, that was how I look at that album. It was what's to come, nothing like the past and nothing like the future, and get ready.
This is this is the shit right here, though. Right
here.
I
truly feel this right here is the actual defining moment of what Tony just said.
I agree too, 100%.
Because this is another level of Eddie. It's a whole nother
attitude.
It's
funny.
a change,
The the intros, he called these piss breaks. Like Cathedral was, you remember in Guitar Player or something, he called them like piss breaks. Cathedral and the intro to Little Guitar. I always thought that was pretty funny. A piss break. No, it's genius, dude. You know?
Yeah.
I must be a couple of seconds behind you guys. Where are you at?
Intro to Little Guitars is playing for me right now.
Where at in it?
I'm at the beginning of the drums for Little Guitars right now.
Me too.
Okay. I'll fast forward about 3 seconds. All right. So I hope everyone is having fun listening to this.
Guys, we're sitting here listening to
we are.
With Renoff. This is I told them before, this is bucket list stuff for me, guys. Right there.
I firmly believe that Van Halen at this stage in their career, they could do no wrong. It was like, you know, like athletes are in the zone.
Right.
Where they're just like, they hit, 380 and they're baseball players, something like that. I think this is like anything they touched, no matter what it was.
After Diver Down, anything they did.
Yeah. It was rarefied air. They were just like,
sure.
So, and this came up earlier, but I was going to throw this out here. People appreciate this. One of the things that Templeman was notorious for, and he told me about this. It was sort of like a character flaw. He would constantly resequence the records. So he was like, I used to drive John Landy insane. I'd be like, we got to cut another acetate. So he basically like rearrange the songs again, and I want to hear it. And then he would go home on his record player and listen to this new sequence. And so I haven't. There were probably like 6 or 7 different versions of this album that he played with. So people are always like, oh, they don't like the track listing. I'm like, well, just shuffle it. You probably would have gotten to what Ted had at one point. But at one point, side 2 of this record, there was one that went up for auction on eBay. One of these acetates that Ted had ordered up, and it was "Hang 'Em High," Little Guitars intro, Little Guitars. It would track 3, "Dancing in the Streets," track 4 on side 2. Would have been "Cathedral," "Secrets," "Happy Trails."
Wow.
And so side 1 would have been "Good Times Gone," "Full Bug." That's what maybe remember. "Intruder," "Pretty Woman," and then "Big Bad Bill" was the last track on side of a vinyl, side 1. So, it's interesting to think about, like you're talking about, like they're in the zone. That's the thing. Like, it's like you really can't. I mean, yeah, you obviously want this. Want the single to be up front on a record typically to be heard, but it's like, it's like shuffle it, Ted. It's all going to be good. It's Van Halen, right? It's like you can't really just like throw the numbers up in the air and like rearrange them on the floor. You're good. It's like he said he like would continually play with these sequences over and over again. But the side 2, "Hang 'Em High," Little Guitars with the acoustic intro, "Dancing in the Streets," Cathedral, Secrets, and then "Happy Trails" as the closer.
Wow. Well, if you look at the original album, I mean, I guess they had to submit all that stuff, the artwork, and the song order is like it's always like on that because it's Ted probably because he changed.
So for Fair Warning, for sure. I think I'm not sure. Someone has told me it's Women and Children first too, but I don't know if I've seen that one. It's for Diver Down and Fair Warning. If you have the original first, like whatever 500,000 copies that were pressed or whatever, there is a sequence that's different than the record, and that was the sequence that when they were like, "Gotta finalize the artwork, Ted. What do you have?" And he's like this, and then like he's like, "I have a few more days. I'm gonna change it again." And then the artwork comes out, and it's like it doesn't match the record. Like in later pressings, they fixed it, but like I have a couple versions. I have Diver Down and the Fair Warning of an early pressing, and they're not in line with what's on the vinyl record.
Wow.
Yeah, those track listings on every album are not every one of them.
Yeah, every one of them. Because I looked at 5150 recently, and I said, and I thought 10 right away. I go, oh, I bet you this is a 10 because every song on 5150 is not what's in the order that they're on.
Is that right?
Yeah, and that's what I was saying before. Ted must have sequenced that too, and he must have asked him.
This album's like that farewell. Yeah.
Yeah. 5150.
I suspect that Don and Ed had the final. Obviously, they had the final say on what they wanted to sequence. Maybe Mick Jones, but yeah, Ted threw in his 2 cents on those.
Yeah,
but the early ones, he's definitely responsible for the ones being out of line. And this to me, I always thought this was like one of the cooler things that Dave came up with. Well, and then again, whose idea was it to bring the father in to play on it, John to play? I don't know whose idea it was, but like, I mean. I have no doubt that, whatever static there was about the record, the brothers had to look back on this and be like, our dad played on a record with us.
How cool is
that? Again, I'm not saying like that's Dave's doing necessarily or Ted's doing whatever, but it's like that happened, then that could happen in the context of Van Halen. It's like so cool, right? It's like had to be like super cool for those guys.
It was Dave's idea, wasn't it?
I think it was.
This song was for sure, yeah.
Yeah.
It was his idea to get the dad on there too.
as a clarinet player, his dad is. I don't know if you guys have ever really focused on this little clarinet excerpt in here. It's outstanding.
Yeah, and he's missing a finger too. His father was missing his little finger.
Ted told me, he's like, I had no idea about this song. Dave brought this song. He's like, I didn't know. He's like, I had pretty good song knowledge, but they say I did not know this song.
Dave heard it on his Walkman and on some AM station.
I read something in researching this album, and somebody gave credit to Dave for actually making this happen with his dad playing the clarinet. I don't know if it's true or not.
Yeah, I kind of believe it.
Yeah, Dave was all in about it. Dave heard the song and said, yeah, we can do this, and we can get your dad to play on it too, and it happened.
And again, I want everyone who's listening to kind of step out of the Van Halen mode and like think about this. It's like you say to Iron Maiden, again, I'm not knocking Iron Maiden, but like, you guys should record a big band jazz song. Yeah. It's like, well, what? Like, that's a terrible idea. Like on paper, this is a terrible idea. Like, but in practice, it's like it fits with the record, and you don't even think twice about it. They're playing like 1920 style music, and you're like, oh yeah, it is completely in character. It doesn't sound forced. It doesn't sound fake. It sounds totally legitimate in terms of the Van Halen catalog. And again, I get it. It's not anyone's top 10 favorite songs or 20 or 30. I get it, but like, it's like you don't listen to this and go, what the hell are they thinking? This is the dumbest idea I've ever heard.
Yeah,
right? It should have been like, you're like, are you insane?
As a fan, when I hear Van Halen do this, I always put it to Dave. I always said, this is Dave's contribution to the band. This is his thing.
That's what everyone thought initially.
I reveled in it just like everybody else. It was great.
What made them special? This is one of the things that made them special. Stuff like this.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That's right.
Yeah.
They're different. They're so and then it worked, because listen to the next song. It's like you can go from that to this,
Yeah. Full Bug. My God, what a song, dude.
Dave with the acoustic guitar and the harmonica, right, on this one.
Wow. I didn't actually believe originally that Dave could actually play harmonica this well, but he can. And it's ironic because you don't really see him do this much. I mean, have you listened really? I mean, I know you guys have.
I love the vibe of this song.
You listen to this harmonica solo. It is, who plays a really great harmonica? Blues Travelers.
John Popper.
His name off the top of my head. Yeah,
Popper. Yeah.
And I mean, when I think of a accomplished harmonica player, slide harmonica, that's who I think of. But this is really, really great. And the thing about it is he doesn't do it. He only plays how many? And there's a great question. How many songs does Dave play harmonica on in his catalog of Van Halen songs? I would like to know. I believe
this is it. I think.
I'll tell you what, the guitar solo in this song is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
That difficult run he does, and then that little jazzy thing where him and now
Right.
Okay,
Right.
so the Alan Hallsworth, he was playing a lot with Alan Hallsworth in these days. He does get it's you guys have all heard about that, especially on this song right here we're talking about. Ironically, I noticed other songs in the album that I hear this kind of Hallsworthy thing going on as well, not just this one solo in this one song.
The solo is incredible.
Yeah, Ted would talk about this, the kind of intuitive from the brothers being this intuitive, like they'd have all these things like these kicks and everything. He said they would have all these little parts they'd work out together.
Yeah.
It's funny because that boogie, it's in their DNA, because you listen to that big band jazz. Sometimes I put the station on here and I hear that and I go, oh, that's where it came from. It's like they that in their DNA.
They heard it.
Yeah.
Right.
Listen to
it's just that on steroids. That's what they are, really,
Well, listen to the clarinet solo that his father does and think about Eddie's guitar playing and his solos. There's incredible similarities to that music and the way Eddie plays guitar. And that's one of the things that made him so unique, is because he's a product of the music he was raised with from his father.
I'm just coming out of the harmonica solo. Is that where you guys are?
I'm a little ahead.
Right.
I mean, Michael Anthony and Eddie's harmonies, the ahs are in there.
Outstanding.
Yeah, they did this. Yeah, the harmonies, and especially too. This is like there's a ton of like the great Van Halen harmonies on this Dancing in the Street.
Yeah.
This one. Yeah. Secrets.
Yeah, this is a definite a burner. This is a great song. This is one of my favorite, I think, all-time Van Halen songs.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely.
For a guy that doesn't have the most accomplished singing voice, he's a great singer, guys.
No, he definitely. And you know, it's funny because you listen to a lot of the old in the clubs, the old bootlegs of Dave, and some things he just didn't sound good on. But boy, he found I'm sure with Ted's help, and you know, you listen to, I think his best vocal performance on the album probably is Van Halen too. I think he worked hard on that.
Yeah.
I think he sounds great on that album.
All right, boys, all together now. Here we go.
But I think his style developed, and it's, you know, another thing that really is in full focus on this album from here on, you know?
Yes. Yep.
It's and Michael Anthony, his background, you know, I heard every time I've heard him sing lead vocals, I don't think he's a great lead vocalist, Michael Anthony. I just saw a clip the other day. He was singing a song with Sammy. I forget what Van Halen song it was. And it was just like, and even when somebody get me a doctor, I'm like, he doesn't really have a good lead singer voice. But when the background vocals are just is insane because of that, that range that he has. It's like, like the Beach Boys.
I think he can, but we're just so used to it. I think that the conversations about Gary and Extreme versus, I think those two conversations are somehow kin to each other.
Yeah.
You know, I just think it's what we're.
It's interesting. Yeah. The other thing, in terms of Mike, I asked Mike Anthony when I interviewed him, I asked him if there was ever a thought that,
are we done there?
When he joined, if there was ever going to be like a Deep Purple, like a David Coverdale, Glenn Hughes, like obviously Mike has this real high voice, and Dave had sort of like that raspy Coverdale-esque, again different, but like sort of like that thick. And he's like, oh, I don't think Dave ever, kind of chuckled, and he said Dave never would have like agreed to that, like never, you know, like whatever, like they would do it for like on Beer Drinkers and Hellraisers, but it was never going to be like, oh, here's the bass player who could sing some lead vocals. But like, you know, I suspect that probably was filtering those guys' brains, like, oh, he's like a bass player like Glenn Hughes, he can sing really, like he has this great singing voice. And so I imagine that was part of when he got hired, that was, you know, that was kind of burn era Deep Purple. But yeah, like he basically was like, yeah, Dave wasn't going to go for the Dave was the front man. He wasn't going to like, you know, wasn't going to like suddenly be like, and now I'm lead vocals. Like Dave was never going to like, you know, agree to that type of thing.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's why Pretty Woman is amazing in a way, because it's like he's singing the whole song in harmony with Dave. The whole, it's you know, pretty much, you know, it's
Mike could sing with anybody, I think.
Yeah, well,
Mike
that's true,
sings great.
He sounded great with Sammy. He sounded great with Dave. You know, with Dave's voice, they just meshed well together. And with, you know, Eddie also had a good background vocal voice. You know, Eddie could. His voice is prominent. I guess in the later years, Mike would do both parts on some of the albums and stuff like that. But you know, Eddie's voice is pretty loud on some of those recordings. You can hear it, and he could hold it. You know, he could sing pretty well. You know, And he always said he would get mad when people would say, "Oh, Mike is just," you know, in the later years, he'd be like, "Oh, it wasn't just Mike. That was me singing."
Well, there was a little give and take between whether we were talking about a live performance or we're talking about a studio album, and they had to work back and forth.
There's two parts in the background, a high and a low, and Ed contributed. But there were times where the songs just required Mike as the background, and you heard Mike and Dave on a lot, and not Ed. But you know, Ed did sing on most, yeah.
And Ted was on a few things too. I think on the earlier albums, Ted sang a few.
Yeah, Ted doubled Ed's part. He occasionally would say like, I doubled Mike's part, but I think he was just misspoke. He misspoke. What he was basically saying was like, sometimes because Mike's voice was so powerful in the mixes, he's like, I would just double Ed's voice just to give it like a fullness, and then Don would mix it. But you could never hear, you could never hear Ted's voice. So it was just like, it was just mixed in to sort of like fill out a little bit of that to make it more, give it more fullness. But yeah, like Dance the Night Away, I think, and Feel Your Love Tonight, he sang on that stuff. You know, again, just is one of the guys out there singing along just to kind of, you know, but Ted, that's what Ted did. Ted was a singer with Harper's Bazaar, and it kind of made sense, like just to have like, an extra, he's like, when I was around and it fit, I would do it. It was never like the plan, like I'm going to sing. We listen back, well, let me double that vocal, and then we can have that make it easier to mix.
I have a feeling that Ted was pretty involved in like the harmonies, you know, okay, you sing the third, Mike, you know, Ed, you sing the root, you sing the third. You know, like, I think that arranging those things, I think Ted played a huge part probably in that, because like, you know, you think they'd have a weakness somewhere, but they were just bulletproof because they didn't have you know, a lot of bands, they don't have, I mean, I always talk about the Police. I'm a big Police fan, and it's just like Sting had to sing everything on the albums, the background vocals, the other guys couldn't sing at all. And it's just like, but live, Van Halen could bring it. What you got?
Well, yeah, Mike brought that. Ed used to sing, didn't want to sing anymore. Dave's Dave, but Mike brought an element there. Mike knew about it, and it rubbed off a little on Dave. Mike and Dave sing beautifully together,
and
but it rubbed off.
Mike and Eddie sing real.
Mike brought that, I think.
Oh, definitely, without a doubt.
To start with.
But you know, so the biggest problem for me with Diver Down is that it's only 30 minutes long. But I mean, that's, you know,
I know.
Right.
But
yeah. That's one of my running jokes on Twitter is like, you know, like people who come at me and like, there's too many covers. It's, you know, it's too short. There's, you know, whatever. And I'm like, so, you know, it's like, yeah, I mean, it is too, it's like, so, but yeah, it's like, it could be longer, right? But it's like, you know, it's like you're complaining about, like, I'm happy with what we have. I would like more, but like, don't complain about it. Like, it's too short. It's like,
oh
yeah,
this
is great.
Well, yeah. We loved it, but it did, in hindsight, you can say a lot of things, but I'll say that it seemed to, in hindsight, have one or two too many covers. I think they could have leveled out the playing field on all that stuff, and you know, but look, it is what it is.
Yeah, and I think, you know, in the Templeman book, Ted tried to tell the story from his perspective, the way he saw things play out. You know, certainly when the studio was built, you know, that was something that was going to really, that eventually became a game changer in terms of what was going to happen. Like there was going to be a lot more control for Ed and a lot more working on stuff with the clock not running, right? So he could really think about how he wanted to do stuff. And a lot of the stuff, like, as Ted said, like Jump, you know, I think Ted was very honest about the book about Jump. He's like, look, as much as I want to work on Sunset Sound, I can honestly say, I don't think Jump would have come out as great as it came out if we had been at Sunset, because we would have had to like wrap it up. Like it needed that time to sort of like, they developed it and they worked on it. Those guys played it, right? They had the basic parts down, but they sort of like figured out all the different, Ed and Al and Don Landy working, kind of figured out all the pieces. And Ted heard that finished version of it and he was like, shit. You know, and that's the other thing that I think is worth, you know, putting out here to people is that, like, you know, people are always like, Ted hates the song. Like, you know, he likes the song as a song. He just never felt like it was right for Van Halen. It doesn't mean like he's like, the song sucks. Right. He just thinks like, you know, he's like, it just felt like it got away from what I, as a producer, thought that Van Halen's sweet spot was in terms of what I thought they should do. But he's like, look, he's like, Eddie was right to like basically be like, you're wrong, Ted. It's great. You know, he's like, I'm glad. He's like, I go to, you know, listen to every baseball game I listen to or football game it's played. He's like, so like, you know, Ted has never been like, screw Eddie, you know, he was wrong. He's like, obviously he's like, he was right and he's happy. He was happy to be proved wrong. Right. But he just basically was like, you know, it's just, for me, it just felt like it was a departure from the Van Halen sound, and especially without having the hindsight in the fall of '83, Ted was worried like people are not going to like this. They're going to be like, what happened to the Van Halen of the Full Bug and you know, all this stuff. It's just was so different.
I hear that a lot, but a lot of hardcore say that. But I'll tell you, when Jump came out, I loved it.
Yeah,
you hear
I loved it too.
Al's drums.
The whole thing was amazing,
dude. I loved it. I couldn't think a bad thing about it.
Yeah, I did too. I loved it too. But you know, Ted had his obvious, you know, thoughts on the band. Because I remember even as far as like Foreign Lawful Carnal Knowledge, I remember Ted saying, I like Ed when he writes the riff based songs. He goes, those are the ones that, you know, he preferred when Ed had a cool riff. Right.
Exactly. Right. And talking about Love is Ted's favorite song. Like he's like, that's it. Van Halen to me. That to me, like Unchained, that's Van Halen to me. Like, and again, he wasn't like trying to tear anybody down or say anyone like the music sucks. He just felt like in the context of what he thought Van Halen was as the producer, he's like, that's the greatness of Van Halen right there.
Yeah. And that makes
Ted
sense.
was right.
Well, I mean, it's like, you know, he also, I think, really tried to be honest with me about the fact that he's like, I wish in retrospect that I had let Ed been more like deferential about that, instead of like going, I'm not really crazy about this, instead of going, okay, you know what? You've earned the right to basically like, and of course he's like, we cut the song, we did the song. It's obviously he didn't like, Ted never was like, we're not putting the song on the record. But I think that Ted, in retrospect,
Ian's Guitar
wishes,
Shack, welcome.
Wishes that it had been, maybe would have been less tense if Ted had been more willing to go, hey man, I love you, I love this song, let's do this. And even, kind of like, instead of being like, I don't know, like that I think he feels like that was, in retrospect, didn't help that sort of that atmosphere around the record, because he said it was just something. He's like, I thought it was a cool song. I think it's a cool song. I just didn't think it was right for Van Halen. I was worried about the reception. That's the thing.
But that's part of the record executive in him too. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, like going. We've all seen that happen with bands when they were like, what happened? Like they did this. They've gone off in this different direction. And suddenly people are not like, it's like, it was like the Judas Priest Turbo record or something, right? Which actually I think was very Van Halen inspired, by like super Van Halen inspired record. But like a lot of Priest fans were like, what the hell? I remember like a lot of the metalheads in my school, like, I don't know, man. Like they were just kind of like, they would went to see the Turbo live show, but they were kind of like, I don't know, like, I don't know.
When the electric guy came on, the look on his face was like, what?
There was like, there was definitely like a, the foundation of that was kind of cracked a little bit in the sort of the Priest, image and everything. And so, bands have to change, they have to evolve musically. So that's all part and parcel of it. But there definitely was like, that type of thing. I remember that very distinctly.
I love the story of when Van Halen was doing the Monsters of Rock tour and they had the Scorpions, I guess. I don't know if they were up at Eddie's house. They came over and they played the album for them. And when Feels So Good came on, they were the Scorpions were just sitting there like not reacting to it, I guess, like that. And I guess they didn't like it. Eddie and Alex thought it was funny because they obviously they didn't like the song. I don't know if they said, "Oh,
right,
not really our thing," but I think they got it. Actually, thought it was funny, Eddie and Alex. That they hated that song. They just tell
one of the best songs on the record, man.
Yeah, yeah. Don Landy told me a funny story when I was talking to him in the midst of the TED book. He said that like Steve Lukather came up to 5150 in 1983 and heard Jump, and he was like, "Well, that's kind of cool." And then they were like, "We're gonna put it on the record," and they're like, he's like, "You're gonna put that on the record?" Like he was just like, he was like, just again, probably like Ted was like taken aback. Like, are you serious? Like you're gonna not that you didn't like, it wasn't. I know Lukather didn't like it, but he was like,
right.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Like, are you gonna like? Sure. It's not. It's not in the wheelhouse of what he expected. Right. Yeah. He was just kind of like, okay. Like I'm sure he just what Don said. Like he sort of got this look on his face, like with this very surprised look on his face for a moment. Like he was like, "Oh, really?"
But of course, they chunked Dave underneath the bus about it.
About Jump.
Yeah.
You think?
Yeah, they. I think it seems like Dave loved it right off the bat too.
Yeah.
That's
it's
what
interesting.
It seems.
It's interesting. I think the thing about Jump is that if Van Halen hadn't had a #1 song in 1984, if the album had come out and it had done well and whatever, like it had been like Diver Down level of success, I'm not sure that Dave would have been able to launch a solo career as easily. I don't think it would have happened, actually. I mean, that's my, who knows? Like, it's a counterfactual. You can't prove the counterfactual, but that, it definitely put them in a stratosphere of different level of success. I mean, that was, when you had the #1 album, the #1 or the #2 album, right? The #1 song, and they were suddenly like these, like, had been sort of catapulted into a different level of success for them. They sort of transcended beyond sort of like this great hard rock heavy metal band. They sort of became like more of like, like the Michael Jacksons and the Madonnas. They sort of got up at that level. That was pretty big fuel for Dave's fire, to sort of be like, I can do bigger things.
And my theory is that they people may think I'm crazy, but my theory is 1984, they had to implode the band. It had to end there. That's what I feel like. It's like, it was when you burn that hot, something's got to just explode.
Well, if it's that hot, if Dave's out there doing more music plus making a movie, and those were supposed to come out at once, obviously the soundtrack or the little how many songs isn't going to be like the regular albums with the band, but to get the movie scratched, okay, but still to put that Crazy from the Heat out. We accepted it at the time. We didn't know any better. We dug it, you know. I listened to it a lot right
I just
off the bat.
I just
You
think
know,
they had to
but
combust
it
that
was
point.
weak out there with no movie. You know, it
Right.
needed that movie.
Well, right. That's the thing. It's like if you listen to those interviews with Dave, like right before he leaves Van Halen, he's like, "We're gonna make a movie." Like he kind of he's kind of like, I think he was like saying like,
They were in
"I
it.
want the guys to be in it," right? He would say, and or I want them to do the music for it. If they don't want to be in it, and that's I mean, right? Eddie said like that was the other thing. It's like, oh, would you do the music for my movie? It's like I could only imagine like how angry that would have made. Like you're our singer, it's our band. I mean, the brothers, I think, were always of the opinion, I think rightfully so, that there was a Van Halen before you showed up, and there'll be a Van Halen after you leave. And this is like, this is our band. It's the brothers, the two brothers, the two brothers.
Right.
That's what Van Halen is. And sort of like, that must have been a really, really not received well. Like,
but
oh, by the way, would you do the music? For my movie.
Right. But they had the mindset that I mean, it probably wasn't said or anything, but Ed now they didn't do music outside of the band. I mean,
it was that was never going to be like a. Yeah, I mean, I if you can imagine like the Hot for Teacher video, and the other thing too is even the Dave videos. I mean, that's one of the things that I heard from Pete Angelus when I did the Eat 'em and Smile retrospective for Guitar World a few years ago. I spoke to him about it. He's like, all the costumes, the props, all the stuff that was in like the extended version of the Roth videos, that was all the stuff for the movie, like the characters, like that's
really?
what the movie. Yeah, like that's
they were going to be in the movie. Okay.
Oh wow, that's right.
Right. So the convenience store guy, all of those characters that was going to be in the movie, used in the movie one way or the other. So you can kind of get a sort of a sense of the vibe, and to kind of imagine like Ed and Alex just showing up in that, like Hot for Teacher style, like kind of goofing around. It is kind of hard to imagine that. I'm not saying it couldn't have happened and it couldn't have worked, but it's kind of hard for me to imagine. Like, I can't imagine Alex Van Halen wanted to do like an hour and a half of slapstick comedy in a movie. That's
well, yeah.
Had to explode.
That's my long-winded way of saying that. That's all a Baxter theory, John. It was.
And then you look because like you look at the music on 5150. Well, look at the direction he was heading. Dave wouldn't have been able. Dreams wouldn't have sounded like Dreams if it did. But it couldn't. It had to explode and just. This is what was born out of that explosion. Was the next, what Dave did on his own and they did on their after that. That's
Ed. You look bummed. Why don't you call Sammy?
Yeah, right.
For fuck's sake.
But
rest is history. Yeah, so, that was that's it's just knowing all of those elements that were sort of kicking around. But I will say this, that if you think about the parallel here is for me is what happened with the Stones in the 80s. It's not exact, but there was a period of time around 86 or 87 particularly, where like the Stones are over, Keith and Mick were like trashing each other in the press. And you're like, if you had asked someone in 1987 if the Stones were ever going to make another record, you're like, probably not. And those guys, whatever, were able to sort of like patch it up. I mean, that's the analogy sort of like that.
MTV, Undercover of the Night was their breaking MTV video, I believe, for the Stones. And that completely revamped their career. And they rode MTV, and that is probably a major influence on what refueled their sort of the reunion, because I agree with you, they were falling off the radar of everyone at that time.
Yeah. And then they did what Steel Wheels was 89. That was like the big, their big comeback. And then that's when they started charging, like that sort of changed the game too. And so the ticket prices and everything, it was like something like I don't remember what. I mean, it was like $30 a ticket, or I don't know what it was. Like you're like $50 a ticket, $40 a ticket. You're like, if you only know what's going to happen in the future, buy your ticket now and see Mick when he's 45, not when he's 80, and you'll be paying 10 times as much.
Greg, that's also when the surcharge came in for like Ticketmaster and everything, and it kicked everything up to another level.
Yeah, that was the
ticket. Your ticket was like $78.50 or something like that. They were
those
getting
guys
almost half.
They were going to get paid. I mean, they were going to get paid.
Yeah, it's better to work it out and stay together. When Dave left, we looked at it like, we like you and we like you. We know you're both going to continue and make more music, but we like you both much better together.
It's
That's why I think they hired Irving Azoff. I think they made more money on the final 3 tours than they ever made in the 80s.
Probably.
Because
yeah. I said
Roger Clemens.
Irving is not to be trifled with.
No, right, exactly. He made it work, and I guarantee you they made more money on the last 3 tours than they made the whole time in the 80s. You know what I mean? Because they said 1984, because of the stage and everything that they carried with them on that, they basically broke even. I don't think they made money on that.
Right. And the other thing that Sammy observed in the book, which was, I thought, an interesting point, was that, basically the way the staging was done too, like you couldn't sell seats behind the stage. The stages were so big that basically 1/3 of the arena was cut off. I mean, basically like that. So, again, you're playing for an arena and it's sold out and it's whatever, it's 16,000 people or 17,000 people. But, but having the 5150 open seating, open staging, like you could sell behind the stage and everything. And,
it's amazing, yeah. I do think it was a sticking point always with. I always got the feeling with Eddie that they would. I always say they see bands like Bon Jovi and they're making Bon Jovi's worth $250 million and this is Eddie Van Halen and this is Van Halen, the American Led Zeppelin, and you're going to tell me that Bon Jovi's made more. What did they have, bad management or whatever in the 80s? Like they must have early on there, because I think the whole deal with Dave in the end was like Azoff was just like separate buses, separate hotels, shake hands, go do the show, see you in the next city. Don't even come to the sound check, Dave. And they just kept the peace that way, and they made it work. But I don't just pretend you're friends for 2 hours, and and at that point they were a nostalgia act pretty much anyway, because nobody wanted to hear the new music, and I think Eddie was pissed off pretty much because the 3 songs on the greatest hits, people would just sit there, they didn't react to them, and that's what we were saying with Chris Gill, saying that Tony Iommi article in Guitar World. Eddie at that point, and that was 2009, said, I don't even think we'll ever do any new music at that point.
I love those new songs off greatest hits. Love them.
Yeah, but
I think and that's all hail Wolfgang for making that happen, right?
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
So it's like I'm always amazed. I mean, I know we got to wrap pretty soon, but I'm always amazed. I'm like, do you not realize that Eddie's son did the absolute impossible, got David Lee Roth back in Van Halen? It's like, are you guys are not aware of how difficult that is? It's more likely to be I don't know, making peace in the Middle East is probably it's easier. It's probably easier than that.
So let me ask you guys. Let's turn the corner. Wolfgang started this run a couple of nights ago on the 20th, and he's done 3 shows. There's a new set list and a new song, and he's showing up playing these new guitars. John, you got one handy there?
You got the pictures I sent you?
I do, bro.
I thought that you were gonna have the guitar, John. I thought you were gonna pull up the prototype. Yeah, he's
John's already got it, man.
No.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, he does.
No.
Let him fool you.
I got one picture here. It's Keith Campbell who's out there. Yeah, you got the same one there.
Yeah.
It's cool.
It's a cross between a 335, a Wolfgang, I guess. The upper horn is like a Wolfgang. The round bottom is kind of like a 335 or even an Ernie Ball, and the headstock looks like kind of like a Gretsch or a Gibson, I guess.
Yeah, and it's semi hollow.
Yeah, and I think Keith said that the name of it is actually the SA
126.
So
yeah,
semi-acoustic 126. I guess Eddie's birthday.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if Keith.
Very cool.
In the chat.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Now this guitar is a bigger. The Wolfgang body is
tiny. Yeah.
Littler, and Wolf, he's a big guy, and it looks really little on him. But this is a larger body, and it looks like a cross, like a hybrid between a 335 and a Wolfgang.
It does.
And the mammoth inlay, I see that. Nice.
What's the cost on the new guitar?
Oh, I don't even know if they've announced it.
It's not a product yet. Yeah, it's not a product.
This is just road testing the prototype, right? Like,
I got you.
Exactly.
There's the inlay, right? Oh,
it's really
God,
cool.
you can't see it. Yeah, you can. Nice.
Very nice.
I like that.
Yeah, so I guess and he played a new song too. So that's
Yeah, this new song is called I Don't Know It All, and he's done it every night. And he also in Salt Lake on night 2 during the encore, which the encore goes to Distance and Don't Back Down last, but he threw in Them Bones by Alice in Chains in Salt Lake.
That's cool.
Yeah.
On YouTube, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
Right
really
on.
a cool surprise that he did that.
Hey,
Yeah,
Adam.
I'm excited, hopefully, to see him once, maybe twice on this run. So that's great. Yeah,
Hey, Gary.
the shows are going to be maybe, I don't know. Yeah, maybe for a long time for the States, right? They're going to Europe, so I'm not sure you're going to see any more shows. I would suspect. I mean, I don't know. I suspect at some point there's going to be a studio period, right? Where they're going to go back in the studio. Wolf is at least he's going to do another record, I would think, at some point. I don't know. So if they're going to Europe,
maybe next fall, because I think this thing ends in April, and then he's going with the Scorpions, and then who else in Europe? He's doing a couple.
Right.
Kiss.
Right.
He's got a date or
you
two.
figure
Right.
maybe September or something. He goes back in.
To be a fly on the wall when Klaus Meine tells him, "Oh, I know your father," like this on the German accent. Your dad. Oh, your dad. And, like your uncle. We had such a good time on the Monster Rock. I'm sure.
And that song feels so good. Sucks.
Yeah, I mean, in all seriousness, I'm sure there's going to be some funny anecdotes. I'm sure, like that's going to happen, right? They're going to be like, "Let me tell you a story. What your dad or your uncle did, or whatever." I'm sure there's going to be. So that's kind of cool.
Those guys will have.
Brings it all.
They'll
full
have
circle,
fun
right?
in Europe. They'll have fun
cool.
over there.
Scorpions have a new record coming out on Friday, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I didn't have the Scorpions on my bingo card to keep making records into the 2020s. Right. It's amazing. They're like there's no look. I think they have any interest in stopping, which is incredible. So good for them. Good
for them. Is right, exactly. So, Greg, you know what I want to ask you? You think Don Landy will ever speak like at length? You think he'll ever?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, like, there are guys who are on the one side of the glass because that's where they feel comfortable. And I think, Don is like, he's done a few interviews here and there where he'll answer questions like for print, but like, I think I can't speak for Don. I'm not Don's spokesperson. But I would, just knowing him, I find it incredibly hard to believe that he would ever sit for a on-camera interview unless there was some sort of like Alex Van Halen behest. We're going to do something like that where he would sit for it. It's just not in his nature, right? He's just, it's just not his thing. Yeah, I mean, and there are certain, even Ted doesn't like to do on-camera stuff. Like right. Ted did 0 on-camera interviews for his own book. He did plenty of like print stuff, like Rolling Stone, whatever. Like, if a reporter wants to talk to him on the phone, answer questions, that's fine. But he doesn't want to like do a podcast.
Right.
He doesn't, and so that's kind of where he's at with that. So, I think as much as it would be amazing to have like an hour to have somebody ask Don questions and answer questions about everything he did, I hope I'm wrong. Like, I hope like one day I hear like, oh, guess what Don Landy just did? He just, he's going over to Sunset Sound. He's going to sit down and talk.
Oh, that would be, he's the one we all want to hear from, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, I get it. Yeah. But I think it's also, I don't think I'm speaking out of school and saying it's also like, no one's going to be able to talk him into it. Right. Beyond like, again, like this is for something for Van Halen or something. I would imagine if Alex asked him to do something, he would do it, but no one's going to be able to like, come on down, Don. And he's going to be like, all right, you finally convinced me. I'm going to hop in the car and I'm going to drive down there. It's like, it would have to be like, he would just have to wake up one day and be like, I want to go do that. But it's just, there's certain, look, I mean, there's a certain reason why you don't see like a lot of engineers and stuff like that. There's some guys who do it, but a lot of guys are just like, they're just, they want to work behind the scenes, so to speak. And that's sort of the way Don is. And I think also, I don't think, again, I'm speaking out of school, what I would say that like Don feels very strongly that like whatever cool things he did, he can like appreciate that people enjoy it. But he like, again, it's like he doesn't want to be taking credit for the stuff Eddie did. Like he doesn't want to even be seen like in like for the stuff that Alex did or Dave did or Mike did. He's like, you know, he basically like, you know, I was the guy who like, yeah, it's cool I did this stuff and got it on tape, but like they're the artists, they're the stars.
I'm the man behind the curtain. I'm the man behind the curtain.
He gets it, right? He gets it. Like he understands that like somebody might be like, oh, want to ask him like, how did you get a vocal for Mike McDonald or something like that? What microphones did you use? I mean, again, like I could probably email him and if someone wants to know that, you know, I could ask Don, like, what microphone did Mike McDonald normally sing through? He would tell us. It's not like it's like some sort of like trade secret, but the idea of like sitting or doing a book or something, I just, you know, it's just not his, you know, his thing. But again, I hope I'm wrong. Again, I'm not, you know, I don't speak for Don, and it's just my take and my conversations with him. That's my feeling on what he would probably do, but I don't know.
Well, we were happy to see. We talked about it on here quite a few times. But a few months ago, that picture of him and Alex, and for that Dolby Atmos thing. So it kind of sets your mind going. It's like, oh, they're going to check out this new Dolby Atmos. So maybe they're going to remaster some of these albums, and maybe they want him to be involved. I don't know. You know.
Yeah. Look, I mean, there's, you know, I don't know what those guys are up to. I sort of religiously don't ask those types of questions for obvious reasons, because you don't want to be seen as like the guy. Like you just don't ask, right? But you know, there's, you know, in terms of like being with it and being like on top of it, in terms of like knowing like the songs and having a great like grasp of that stuff, like Don is still like 100% like dialed in on that, like with his memory, you know, and stuff, and without having like, again, without having the tapes on hand or whatever. So I, you know, I think if there is something cooking with that stuff, I mean, he's, you know, I'm very glad beyond the relationship that's old and very important, I'm sure, to Alex, especially now. I think that's like, there's nobody better on the planet who, you know, again, assuming, obviously, if Don wants to be there, wants to do it, you know, he's the absolute number one person who should be like sitting next to Alex, whatever they decide to do with music going forward. He's the guy. As long as, you know, as long as Don's walking this planet, he's like, he's the guy. Because, you know, he's going to remember, he was there. Like he can listen to those tapes and be like, oh, I remember this. I remember what we did here and what this, like, why we didn't use this track or whatever. Like there's nobody else, you know, not Ted, not anybody else who's going to be that able to remember, because Don had, you know, Don was at that board doing all that stuff 100% for every single song that they did.
So we can hope
during the first 6 albums.
Yeah, we can only hope that that he's involved in something, you know, in the future here, you know.
Yeah, just you know, yeah, it's just you. It's just, as a Van Halen fan, just sort of like you have to get very zen about it. Like whatever happens will happen, and you know, we all have our wishes and hopes for what can happen, but we'll wait and see. We'll see.
I mean, we always say the easiest thing would be remasters of the albums anyway, even regardless of Don, and just, you know,
the last half, the Hagar needs
they were
a remaster.
And that was probably because, like I said, Eddie was probably mad at Hagar, and when Alex said, well, screw you, Hagar, we're not going to remaster any of your, you know, I was like, that's how we'll punish you right now. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah, well,
maybe.
I think again, speaking completely on my own with no inside information, that I always thought that's a very plausible theory. I don't know. That's plausible to me. That seems logical.
Yeah, me too.
I don't expect anything, but if they do, if I were to pick one thing, I would say remaster the Hagar era.
Yeah, that's easy.
And that's
easy money.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cha-ching.
Yeah, exactly. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's like, you know, there's all sorts of stuff that could be pursued. I say it all the time to people when they ask me, you know, I always think like what might be cool would be, you know, if there's not wanting to dive into the Van Halen catalog right away, I would certainly welcome, you know, maybe like an Eddie Van Halen soundtrack project like Wildlife, and even, you know, even the thing like Seduction of Gina, which I would always think, you know, that's Wolf's mom and dad worked together on this thing. She was in the movie, Ed did the music. You know, that again, it's not in the, it's obviously very different than Van Halen, but it sort of gives you a sense of where Ed's head was around with keyboards at that time. And again, it doesn't have to be like this sort of like monumental, like here's the new Van Halen thing that everyone has to like kind of, it's just sort of like, hey, it's a tribute to Ed as a musician who made music for movies. You know, maybe that would be something, but that
Yeah.
Those guys might think that's the dumbest idea on the ever, but that's, to me, that's like, maybe that's a sort of like a step. You don't have to go through all the tapes, right? Just go through just a baby step towards something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
That's exactly.
You know what? It's just a shame because you don't want the memory of him to fade. Kids in their early 20s don't even know who he is. At this point already, and it's like, wow, it's like shocking how kids don't. But listen, Jimi Hendrix's family, they did a pretty good job over the years keeping Hendrix out there. Everybody knows it, and somebody's got to keep
Yeah, there's and it's a fine line to walk. I mean, I think the thing that always comes to mind with me is like the sort of the mid 70s stuff with some of the Hendrix stuff was really like there was not a lot of quality control sometimes, and you could argue that okay, it's fine because there was Jimi Hendrix product, and like everyone 5 years after Hendrix was dead never forgot about Hendrix, because even if there were like mediocre music coming out, there's a new Jimi Hendrix record coming out. On the other flip side of that is that you're right. I mean, you're right. It's like with Elvis, like there was the Elvis brand has been they've been the family Elvis Presley Enterprises basically with Priscilla, and they've done a good job of sort of keeping, like, the movie is coming out now. There's always seems to be, they've sort of been able to keep that iconic Elvis presence. Where like a 12-year-old kid may not know who Elvis is. You show a picture, they go, "Oh, is that guy who used to swing his hips around?" They had like some, sort of in their mind somehow, even if they don't know the songs necessarily. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there is something to be said for the legacy of an artist needs to be preserved by regular releases. It just has to. It just, again, you don't have to put out everything, but you need to sort of to keep things alive, or it will fade, right? There's no Van Halen tour coming down the pike. There's no new Van Halen, like, new music in terms of, like, obviously the band is defunct, so something has to be given to keep that legacy going.
And we, because of the way things were, as from your book, they didn't overcut albums.
Right.
They just recorded what they needed, and that was it. There's not a lot of leftover stuff apparently, and they say, well, if it was any good, maybe he would have put it out.
Well, and that's always been,
that's the key right there. Right. I think
Alex's public and Eddie too, right? That, like, the good stuff went on the albums, right? That was sort of the perspective on that. I mean, there is enough material where there could be things from sessions that could be put out. Right, but you're not going to suddenly have like a lost Van Halen record of, like, from Diver Down Era or something. There's not that. You're right. There's not that much stuff. That said, right, there is beyond what's at Warner Brothers, which there may, maybe there's enough to probably cobble together an album's worth of material from all the first 6 albums. Right, there's enough that could be done in the right way. That could be done, but there is, as we all know, a wall of tapes up at 5150, and that's a totally different thing. That's whatever Eddie did up there with Alex, without Alex, whatever he recorded, and that's a whole different thing. And understanding that's going to take, like Wolf has said, that's going to be like, he's like, don't count on that anytime soon, because that's going to be a monumental undertaking of, like, having to go through all that,
making the tapes and
just trying to, like, just think of the amount of time it takes to sort of, like, to digest everything. You can't just sort of, like, spend like 2 weeks, like, okay, we've heard everything, we want to put this out. You have to, like, live with it and think, like, oh, is this as good as this is, or what would be best to put out? I mean, it's, that's where I was sort of like kicking around those ideas about the wildlife, and it's sort of like a very, and they may have, they probably have things that are like similar, that are very, very self-enclosed, right? That could be like, in other words, it's like, you don't have to listen to everything. You just be like, listen to this and think, okay, because Don has told me that they cut a lot more pieces of music for wildlife that were used. And again, he doesn't mean like there's like 75 songs they didn't use. He just means that there was, when they were working on the movie with Cameron Crowe, oh, let's have this type of music for the scene, like someone's, running up a stairs, and I have to do music for running up a stairs. He's like, there were pieces of music that we cut that didn't make it into the movie. So there could be like an expanded wildlife type of thing, basically, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Greg, I want to ask you that there's a lot of it in Van Halen Rising, and first I want to say that I remember the week that this book came out. I remember being on lunch break running up the stairs to the upper level of Crabtree Valley Mall in Raleigh, North Carolina, to Barnes and Noble while I'm parked illegally and running up, and the display was right at the top of the escalator.
Wow, very cool.
Yeah,
that's really cool. Yeah, I mean, it was a fun moment in time for me, and especially having Ted come out to do the book signing. I actually had a friend who said to me, he said, "Why don't you ask Ted?" I was like, "Oh no!" Like, he's like, "Why not just ask him? All he can say is no." And I was like, "Oh yeah, you're right. All he can say is no." He's like, basically, he's not gonna like, bite your head off or like, sue you. Just ask him. And I was like, "Oh yeah, okay." And he was like, Ted's like, "Oh yeah, oh, you mean like there'll be people there?" I'm like, "Yeah, there'll be people there. Sign some books." So, oh, Ted's like, "Oh okay, yeah, answer some questions. Oh yeah, sure. Okay, yeah, okay." Wow. And then so it was like whatever that was, like a month out, and then I'm like, what if he doesn't show? It's like you start to have that paranoia. You're like, what if it's like everyone ever been in a play or something? I'm sure it's the same thing. It's like, what if the actor you're playing with doesn't show up, and it's like you don't have an understudy or something like that, But he came, of course. It was great. So that was kind of the best moment of that for me, was like to be able to just have that, kind of like from this crazy idea to write the book.
We heard the legends all of our lives as Van Halen fans, but this truly is, for the backyard party days, this is our history book right here.
Yeah,
I mean, it really is. I mean,
it's an important book for Van Halen.
Yeah, it is.
The stories were so interesting to hear, and you start to hear the same story 15 or 20 times. You're like, oh, that's probably true. I've heard it from 20 different people who had like they hadn't talked about it in years. They're like, oh yeah, oh yeah.
A guy who I like to talk about,
Mark,
I think doesn't get enough.
Yeah,
is Mark Stone.
Yeah, that was tough. I mean, that was really a tough thing. He passed like just a few days before Ed passed away. That was really rough. I mean, I know Mark's wife pretty well, and she was really devastated when Mark died, and then even more devastated when Ed died. I mean, so it was just like, I don't know how to explain it. I mean, I don't want to speak for her either, but I was like, that was like that double blow. Like, and she wasn't, like she didn't like super close with Ed or anything like that, but Mark and Ed had remained friends, and whatever, she had knew that was a important relationship for Mark, and for Ed too. They were always sort of kind of, Mark was welcome to come to their shows and come backstage and talk and whatever, text and stuff like that. I think that was a devastating thing for her personally, and that really tore me up to see her. Everybody lost, who loved Mark or whatever, but of course, kind of having like the two of them, it was like within like 5 days of each other. It was really, really.
And I heard crazy. That I didn't hear that until after Ed passed. I was like, what?
Yeah, it was like, I think it was within a week. It was definitely within a week. But it was I'm
gonna grab more tea. I'll be right back.
A fun thing too to do for me to see at the book signing I did in Pasadena. Mark came, and people were asking Mark for autographs, and I thought like, oh, this is really cool. This is really cool for him. Again, that was never like, obviously my design of writing the book was to have that happen, but like that was a great thing. People were like, he was signing his picture in the book and stuff like that. And I just thought, here's a guy who had to live with that his whole life, the what ifs, what could be. And he had that little, kind of like, I think sense of like, just that, he put, I always tell people like, you're not going to hang out with the Van Halens and play music with them very long if you can't keep up. And he kept up just fine. It just ended up that Mike was a better fit, ultimately really for the band. And that's how that sort of all, went down. And a lot of stuff with Mark didn't really get on all that great with Dave, and, he didn't sing. There's some of that other stuff that went into it, but at the end of the day, Mark was an excellent musician and a good friend of those guys, and he was super important to those guys getting up the ladder there in Pasadena. He was with them for 3+ years and stuff like that. So God rest Mark Stone, because he was a very nice, quiet guy. Again, like a guy he would, it's kind of hard to imagine, like it was very hard for me to imagine him ever being in a big band. Like he doesn't seem to like, he was very reserved. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's some guys who are like kind of cut out to be like stars. Like I just, you know, if there had been a different story told and Mark had been, you know, I'm not saying it couldn't have happened, but it's hard for me to imagine that he would have. So, yeah, but I'm glad you brought him up because he, you know, he was an important part of the Van Halen history and played with those guys on the, you know, when they play in the blacktops at Hamilton Park and Victory Park. He was the guy out there in 1971 where people were like, who the hell is these guys? It was like the Van Halen brothers and like Mark Stone, and they were, you know, out there playing perfect covers of the Who and Cream or whatever else they were doing. And all these, you know, local guys I talked to were like, what the hell are these guys? You know, you know, they basically, you know, had that Mark Stone era. That was, he was always with them through 1974, from 71 to 74. That was all Mark.
Yeah, and Mark made their logo too. The
original.
Original logo that we've kind of adopted the font to, and it's not a font. We discovered that Mark hand drew that.
Oh yeah, right. I would imagine. That's not
a font, so that's where we got.
Did you guys hand drew your logo too? The Mark Stone Halenville logo. That's cool.
Yeah, right.
Well, we should send a couple of those to. We should send a couple of those to Mark's widow. I bet she would really like that. She'd be really.
I'm happy to.
She would probably really like that.
Yeah,
do that. Yes,
very
she's
happy
a
to.
darling, nice lady. Yeah, she'd like that.
Yeah.
So another great thing that came out of your book was that you know, that just that sign that he was able to be there and see that people appreciated, you know, the history of the band, and he was a part of that history, and he got to see that, you know what I mean? And so
he got to play with. I really want to give a shout out to the guys in Van Halen.
I saw that. Yeah,
you know,
that
and
awesome.
He played with them, and he played with them a few times. Like he would, like, you know, like they play at like the swap meet or in Santa Ana, and he would show up, and Mark would show him play, and I think that was really gave Mark.
That was so good.
You know, I never spoke to Mark directly about that, never asked him about it, like, but I think it probably gave him a lot of, like, you know, a lot of joy to be able to come up and to do that and have fun. Like, I know Mark, you know, Mark was a musician, but he wasn't like when he was 60 years old, he wasn't a working musician, right? He wasn't out playing clubs. So I think for him to kind of get up and like to do that again in front of people, I think really gave him a lot of joy. Yeah. And I know he, I mean, he was, you can see on his face on the video. There's a video, if you guys, I'm sure people have seen it, but you haven't seen it from the launch party. I think that video, the Van Halen with Mark Stone, is still up on YouTube. You can see it. He looks, you know, he's like, at first he seems very like, kind of like, you know, a little unsure, but he like after about 30 seconds, it's sort of like all, you know, kind of like muscle memory. It all goes back, and he looked like he was having a great time. So that was awesome. Yeah, I mean, that was like, you know, that was one of the better memories of me of that whole thing. I mean, just, you know, it was all great, but like that was especially cool to be like, wow. And again, shout out to the guys at Van Halen, because they were the ones who like made that happen. Like it was not like, had nothing to do with me. It was like, you know, they were like, Mark's gonna play, and I was like, great. I was like, really? They're like, yeah. That's cool. I'm like, what do you know, and they just, and so they Derek and the rest of those guys were amazing, and in sort of like, you know, kind of recognizing this would be a fun thing, and then they obviously let him play with them a number of times, and I think he really enjoyed that, and I'm glad he had that experience at the end of his life, where again he wasn't out playing bars or clubs or anything. He was doing different work to be able to kind of, you know, relive the glory days and just sort of like playing a band on stage, and that must have been really, really fun for Mark.
Yeah.
Well, too, until this, you had to dig deep on Mark Stone to find out stuff about him, you know, but yeah.
Yeah, it was like, you know, it was a whole like lost era to be sort of unearthed, and obviously that's what motivated me to want to do the book eventually, as I really started to get going on it. They really were, you know, known by people who were around. Like obviously, basically the stories were all known by people who were around and grew up in Pasadena. But like you said, like there was just a little bit of stuff on Wikipedia and stuff like that. It was a much more of an oral history, right? There really weren't many very newspaper articles, and that's why I did so many interviews, because I just kept talking to people who were there and selling all the crazy shit.
When you'd talk to people, and then somebody else would corroborate that story, and it'd be exactly the same.
Oh yeah.
Like, this is.
You know, one of the funniest things was the you know, so Roth, there was the naked flyer, right? There was the Red Ball Jet naked flyer, and you know, for those people who don't know the story, we're watching. There was people would talk about this with me. They were like, yeah, and then Dave and Red Ball Jet, they did this naked flyer. I'm like, they were naked? on a flyer, and I see and like, well, they were naked, but like, you know, you couldn't really tell they were naked, but they were naked. And I was like, okay, whatever. Like, you know, just sort of like, and then eventually the naked flyer surfaced, and I got a copy of the naked flyer, and I was like, oh shit, the naked flyer is real. And actually, you know, they just did this sort of positioning the guitars, and you know, it was this this flyer that, you know, got posted around town, and people got pissed off about it. And then, you know, people told me like, you know, about they were going to do this concert at this middle school at the football field, and they were going to get a helicopter or something like that. But then, you know, it got canceled. And then searching the Pasadena papers, and I don't remember what, you know, you could do word searches. Some of these are digitized. This one was digitized, and it came up, and I was like, holy shit. Wow. You know, but like, again, like that oral history, there were like little fragments of things that could like, you know, could sort of like verify. Like that was like, it was like the concert by a rock and roll band at Elliott Middle School has been canceled due to a misunderstanding with the Parks and Recreation Department. Didn't mention Red Ball Jet, didn't mention Dave, didn't mention, but I'm like,
but you knew
it's true. It was true. It was actually true to the flyer. But yeah, they were gonna. Dave, you know, supposedly he told the guys in the band they were gonna, like, his dad was gonna rent a helicopter or something. They were gonna land like the Stones at all times. It's like, you know, and again, it's like I'm not laughing at the sort of the vision of Dave, because actually it's like, it's brilliant. It's like, we're a high school band, but my dad's gonna spend $300 in 1972 and rent a helicopter, and we're gonna fly from like, I don't know, from like, you know, like we're gonna fly like a half a mile and like get out of this helicopter and run out. But it's like the sheer ludicrousness of this, like you know, doing this. But like in Dave's mind, I'm like, of course, if you do that, if you could do that, like just like the Stones at Altamont, man, you know, it's like, this is gonna be awesome, you know. And to have those little pieces kind of come you know, kind of come together for the book, and that was like, you know, it was fun. I mean, it was like, it was fun, and like that's, you know, to me too, that whole Red Ball Jet saga kind of captures what Dave brought to Van Halen, right? When I tell people like you want to know what Dave brought to Van Halen, watch the Hot for Teacher video, because that's like was basically like Red Ball Jet, like the dance moves. Like Dave wanted the guys in Red Ball Jet to do the dance moves, and they probably did it equally as bad as like Ed, Al, and Mike did them. Right. But that was the whole, like, you know, that was the whole thing that Dave brought to the table, the sort of entertainment, the choreography, the funny costumes, the look at, we're wearing salmon pink tuxedos in this video. Like that's the Red Ball Jet. The Red Ball Jet. Yeah. It's Dave, right? But that was like sort of like, he like first tried to like play those things out in Red Ball Jet. Obviously, it was a high school band. The band wasn't very good.
Well, you know, their band too, when Dave joined Al and Ed, it kind of helped that Dave's dad's a doctor and not a garbage man.
Yeah. Well, sure, right? Like, again, were they actually going to rent a helicopter? You know, I was told that was definitely happening. Like that was a thing. Like, you know, again, was that really going to happen? I don't know.
I'm sure Dave's dad helped him out a couple of times.
But again, like the idea that his father was a doctor and presumably could afford, in theory, something like that makes it more plausible that really was what was going to happen. The choreographer, which is actually another thing that Dave's father put money into the band to basically help get them into the clubs, and they got a guy who was a Motown, guy who did movie choreography. It was a real Hollywood choreography. It wasn't like, you know, the number one call guy in Hollywood for that, but he had choreographed movies and worked with some of these Motown groups and stuff like that in the past. Like the fact that he was actually brought in to basically take these like guys who were like stoner football players, like, you know, to like dance with Dave. I mean, it's like, to me, it was like, it explained everything about like what came later with Van Halen, and part of like what you run up against with the Dave movie ambitions, right? It's like Dave wants to take that whole thing and like blow it up like on the big screen, like make it like bigger than life. And the brothers are like, hell no, we're not dancing in some like, you know, B movie. And again, I say that with all sorts of affection. I desperately wish that movie had gotten made. It like kills me it never got made, you know. But I'm sure they were like, no way.
I'm surprised he never did anything. I figured, he could be an action movie star, you know, Mr. T and David Lee Roth together, you know, in the 80s at some point. I don't know why he never pursued that kind of, you know.
You know, it's interesting. You know, from what I understand, from Angelus, you know, there was actually, if I remember what he told me, they actually shot like an extended trailer. I mean, he didn't have it. Who knows? It's probably like collecting dust. If it exists, it's collected on videotape, collecting dust up at Dave's house or something like that. But they like, you know, to kind of like get the movie made, they did like they shot some scenes or whatever. And they, you know, but he's like, we had everything. Like they had it all. He said we had the locations, they had everything. And again, they never traveled to make it, but they were,
I've
right on
got
the
a
cusp. They
copy of the
basically had
slip.
everything set to make the movie, and the plug got pulled on them, and they never were able to get the funding to make it. Now look again, it could be that was a blessing in disguise because it could have been a giant disaster. But it's like. No, I still laugh at the going crazy video at the beginning of that, and Dave in the fat suit and all that stuff. I still think that's like, for what it is, it's like, to me, it was my 14, 15-year-old mentality. And if it had come out in 86 or whatever, 16 years old, I probably would have thought it was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. And the music would have probably been more accepted. Not that it wasn't at the time. I got it. All of us did at the time, but if it had a movie with it at the time.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that the songs, if I'm trying to remember, and off the top of my head, I can't remember. I used to have it pretty well nailed down in my head. There were, the stuff they did in the fall of '85, meaning the Eat 'Em and Smile Band at Fantasy Studios. They did like Shy Boy, Going Crazy, and a couple of other songs. Maybe Yankee Rose. I don't know for sure. Those are the ones that were going to be in the movie. So there's going to be like on this soundtrack, in theory, there's going to be like 4 David Lee Roth songs, and then we're going to be songs by other artists, maybe like just like the Beverly Hills Cop soundtrack.
Any other soundtrack, right?
Right. There would have been a preponderance of David Lee Roth songs on there, but there would have been like an Aretha Franklin song or something like that. Whoever else would have been in the movie, they would have had singing songs in the movie. So it wouldn't have been necessarily like but then when the movie doesn't happen, then they go to the power station in New York and they do like Ladies Night in Buffalo. I think they did there. And there's some other songs that they finished off. There, but it's yeah. Wow. You guys really know how to go down the rabbit hole and really
Ladies Night. That gets in your head. It'll stay there for 2 or 3 days. Yeah.
Well, Tony, what's the trivia question before we wrap this thing up here?
All right, let's do some trivia. You kids ready for some?
See if Greg even knows his own trivia.
Van Halen trivia.
Oh! $1 million. I've lost my own. Couldn't answer my own question.
$1 million.
I wish.
So Greg has joined us tonight for our 2nd annual live interactive listening party. We dove down on Diver Down. And that was a very cool experience to listen to this with Greg and all of you guys.
Thank you, Greg.
And pick it apart like that, man, awesome.
Yeah, Greg, when I said what album, he right away, he was like Diver Down right away. So I was like, oh, this will be a good one then.
And we'll do these again also in the future, and we'll do some interesting stuff, maybe some bootlegs, maybe these side projects of Eddie that will Starfleet, etc. Who knows? But I like this concept, John. We can listen to this with no copyright risk with the audience.
Right?
Perfect. Yeah. All right. Let's go find us some Van Halen trivia. There's an email address down in the description. Trivia winners email. Email me your name and number and name and address. I don't want your number. You can give it to me, but I'm going to mail you out 1 million Van Halen bucks and a couple of cool Halenville Live picks. Yeah. To the winner of this Greg Renoff style Van Halen trivia. Are we ready? All right. Here we go. And I've got a document that I'm going to show after this.
The document. I forgot about that.
Yeah, I got it.
Let's go.
All right, here we go. After witnessing a stabbing during an early 1976 show at Walter Mitty's Rock and Roll Emporium in Pomona, what did the band do to ensure their safety for their following night's gig after they saw that? What did they
All right,
do?
let's go.
What did they do the next night? All right. That's a hell of a guess right there. I like it.
That's the Blues Brothers.
Chickenware?
Yeah.
All right. So you guys keep an eye and see if we have a winner. And in the meantime, if any of you want custom guitar picks, our friends at Legend Picks will accommodate you. They've made picks for all these fine artists. They can make them for you too. If you want a guitar built, a custom build, I know a guy. Daily Custom Designs.
I know a guy.
I know a guy. His links are in the description. Neil Daly, anything you want, contact him. If you like the cigar style, Brendan B. Squared handcrafts these lovely things. Yeah, man. And Brendan's links are in the description. You can find him easily. And for those of you and us with tattoos, Ink the Original Essential Tattoo Care, high grade formulas with organic ingredients to hydrate and protect. They are environment and reef safe, and they help me and you fight the fade. Take care of your tattoos. This is the best thing out there. Go get you some. Links are in the description. Yep. Any winners yet?
No winners, man. Come on.
All right. Let me show this thing while we're. That's the idea. These guys keep getting me every week, and I told them I'm going to get them.
Well, we don't. Yeah, I can. I could. Oh, you want to let's show your artifact.
Yeah, let's show this. So our good friend here on the show, Lenny Lou, found this, found the original in a bunch of other Van Halen stuff. This has a story of its own, but she was gracious enough after she got it back from getting it, whoever did the authentication, to send me a copy. And so this is from Walter Mitty's Rock and Roll Emporium.
14th of February, 1976.
Yeah.
All right. $500.
$500.
That's a lot of money.
Services.
That'd be a lot of money for back then, huh? Oh, what is it? April 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, or 19th and 26th or something like that? Well,
yeah, 1976. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And
so what does it say? It says 5 sets of 45 minutes of music.
Wow.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And keeps going. Signed by
Larry Ward.
Larry and his daughter. Larry signed that. And Alex Van Halen and 1881 Los Lunas and his phone number.
Don't call the number.
Don't.
Alex isn't going to answer.
No, he's not. But this is a copy of the original that Lenny Lou. Thank you, Lenny Lou. Yeah.
So I'll, as we wait for our winner, so because I have a deep sickness about doing research on stuff like this with Van Halen, I was, just spending my evening trolling through a Pomona newspaper, and I searched for Walter Mitty's, and I actually found, this is just recently, and anyone could have found it, was there. It was just in the PDFs of the newspapers that are scannable and searchable, that about the poor gentleman who died that he was stabbed. I mean, that Eddie had talked about this stabbing, and I never found, when I was doing the Van Halen Rising book, I never found any newspaper article. I probably, it just didn't come up, or I didn't, maybe all the papers weren't digitized. I don't remember. But I found it, and I had posted on Twitter the other day. The really amazing thing is that Eddie had said in 1988 or 87, he'd done an interview with a guitar magazine, and he said all these guys got in a fight over whose motorcycle was faster. And one of the guys, who was in a rival motorcycle gang, stabbed the other guy in the chest or in the stomach and killed this guy. And lo and behold, the article said in the Pomona newspaper said, this guy got stabbed over a fight. And actually, a friend of mine was encouraging me to go look, and there's a newspaper article from 31st of July, 1975, saying that, and this was on a Thursday, that the previous Saturday night, there had been a stabbing and the guy had died. And Eddie was remembered that too, that the guy had not, he got killed. We saw this guy get killed right in front of us. And basically the guy had died, and the newspaper article still affirms that, yes, they were arguing over whose motorcycle was faster. This guy who was, I think, just like 20 or 21 years old, ended up dying at Walter Mitty's Dance Club, 1626 West Mission. They reportedly were arguing over whose motorcycle was faster. Officers said the trouble may have been the result of a motorcycle gang rivalry.
Wow.
Which still doesn't answer the trivia question.
All right, so I just got a email and I got the correct answer
by email,
which, yeah. So
who's our winner?
Let me show this. He must be.
Who's our new millionaire?
Chat.
Oh, Ron Piotrowski. I remember him from back in the old VHML days, back in the 90s.
He's a ringer. He came through. Good job, Ron.
They moved their amps away from the wall so
yes, sir.
They could hide behind them if they needed to, if there was a shootout. Yeah.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Well, you're a millionaire, Ron.
Ron, email me your name and address here, and I'll mail you out that stuff. Thanks for being here, dude.
Congratulations,
Thank
Ron.
you, dude. And
You
thanks
rock,
to
brother.
everybody.
Great job.
Yeah.
Great job.
Here. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome.
Well, I think we've spent all night talking about Diver Down and Van Halen, and it's time to wrap things up.
Speaking of I'm gonna open up this, and this has got Diver Down written all over it.
There you go.
Yeah. And not that I don't have these already, but there's nothing wrong with more, right? Let's see what we got here. Okay, be careful. All right. 1, 2, 3. Very nice. All right. All right. We got passes all over the place.
Nice.
All right, so.
Whoa. Wow.
I don't know whose initials they are, but.
Cool.
I don't think they won because it's unused.
Houston Summit, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so these are. These are the same on this side, but one's South American, one's just
wow,
a regular.
Looks super cool.
Yeah. Tony, you got some controversy. Holly answered the question at 11:29.
Okay.
So, and they moved their amps to give themselves a hiding place. That's
the right answer.
Yeah.
That is the right answer. Well, here's what we're gonna do. since I got that answer and Holly's answer, since he should have technically answered in the chat and not by email, I appreciate him answering. We're going to send Holly 1, 2.
All right, Holly, or you got to give Ron $1,000 Van Halen dollars. Do you have $1,000 bill?
Yeah.
There you go, Holly. You owe me $500,000 Van Halen dollars for. I hooked you up.
Okay.
Holly, she did say she already has $1 million anyway. It's all good. But now you got $2 million, Holly. Come on. Or 650,000 after taxes, like Ed says. Good job, Ed.
Yeah.
Well done, Holly.
You got an extra $1 million. That's next year's stocking stuffer at Christmas, right? Hey. Yeah, this has been so much fun. Greg, thank you so much, Greg.
Thank you, Greg.
And Greg,
thank
you for these.
Yeah, definitely.
I want to personally thank you for these. These are
great reference books here.
Important books for Van Halen fans. And
if anybody doesn't have it, you can get it. We have the link, Tony, right? And
yes,
and Greg, there's still you can still get signed copies, right, Greg?
Yeah, just hit me up. The link is in the bio, as they say. Happy to sign copies and personalize them for people. That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, you'll find it down here after the show. Oh, check it.
There you go.
Very nice.
Right on.
I think the clock is slow. I think the clock is slow too.
Go. Sweet.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Sweet. All right, kids, are we forgetting anything? Am I missing anything, Charles? Hang on.
I believe so.
All right.
On time here.
All right. Greg, thank you again. This has been so much fun, everybody. Greg Renoff.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you all for having me on.
Thanks for being here, Greg. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Yeah. My pleasure.
All right, kids. We're going to be back here next Wednesday talking all things Van Halen. We got a bunch of Wolfgang shows under the belt, and we'll be talking about those. And we got a special guest next week, John. Are we not going to let any cat out of the bag next about it, or no?
You can do whatever you want. You want it? It's up to you. Yeah, sure.
We'll wait.
We'll wait.
How's that?
All right.
Yeah. We'll wait. You'll see next week. Cool. Excellent. All right. Charles Green, John, Sandra, Greg Renoff. We are out of here Wednesday, February 23rd. There you go, dude.
Very nice, John.
I don't put on nothing on the front.
Wonderful.
All right. Any last words there, Charles Green?
Hey, guys, just don't forget, here in Halenville, it doesn't matter if you go north, south, east, or west. Every single road leads straight to Van Halen. You guys be well. Have a great week. Rock on.